During the apocalypse, he transformed into a zombie, a perfectly ordinary one at that. To enhance his chances of survival, he resolved to grow even stronger, achieving a form he could never have attained in life. In doing so, he ascended to become the king of all the undead. Now, his next challenge lies in confronting humanity. The train, stretching across several cars, glides along its tracks with an unsettling calm. Meanwhile, a crowd of oblivious pedestrians crosses the rails, seemingly unaware that a collision with such a massive locomotive could be deadly. The desperate conductor frantically sounds the horn, urging the careless souls to move aside, but his warnings go unheeded. It isn't until the last moment that the crowd finally grasps the terrifying truth. The enormous locomotive is barreling toward them, completely out of control. In a desperate bid for survival, chaos erupts as people flee in every direction. Amidst the panic, a stroller's wheel becomes ensnared, halting a mother who clutches her baby tightly. Torn between her child and the seemingly worthless stroller, she hesitates, unwilling to abandon either. The frantic crowd shouts warnings, urging her to move, while another woman turns away, unable to bear witness to the looming tragedy. In mere moments, that woman would have been reduced to a mere mass of human paste. Fortunately for her, a mysterious figure emerged from the crowd. In the blink of an eye, everything blurred. Instead of witnessing the destruction of the locomotive, the protagonists found themselves stopping it forcefully. The train cars derailed, threatening to unleash an even greater catastrophe. The woman and a child were alive, grappling with the chaos that had just unfolded. Before her stood the enigmatic man, his face shrouded in shadows. Turning to her, the protagonist gently asked if she was all right. Still reeling from the ordeal, the woman expressed her profound gratitude for being saved. But her gratitude swiftly transformed into sheer terror. Even the infant in her arms was frozen in fear. The creature before them resembled a zombie in every way. The woman's desperate scream pierced the air. The protagonist's name is Zombie, and it's fitting he is, quite literally, a zombie. He had just awakened, slowly rising from his bed, grappling with the uncertainty of his own existence and the moment he had transformed into this creature. Yet, despite it all, he held on to a dream, one that mirrored the hopes of any ordinary person. He yearned to forge friendships with humans, to put an end to discrimination. With that aspiration guiding him, he dedicated himself tirelessly each day, convinced that through sheer effort, he would one day make it a reality. His confidence remained unshaken, and he wholeheartedly believed in his dream. However, as he brushed his teeth, he lost yet another one after all. He was a zombie. In his relentless pursuit of that dream, he had long since lost track of how many lives he had touched. Meanwhile, a plane spiraled out of control, hurtling toward a stadium packed with terrified spectators. Panic erupted as the audience scrambled to evacuate, plunging the scene into chaos and mayhem. Then, a small child pointed out the unthinkable. The plane hadn't crashed as everyone had expected. Instead, that massive object had been halted by a single figure, leaving the entire crowd in stunned silence. Nearby, a building was engulfed in flames, fire raging uncontrollably as a desperate woman screamed that her children were still trapped inside. To the utter shock of the firefighters, a zombie suddenly emerged from the inferno, cradling 5 children in its arms. He wasn't as strong as he remembered being in life, or at least that's how it felt now. It all began with a zombie pandemic, the dawn of the apocalypse. At the time, he was just a student, caught off guard as everything spiraled out of control. In the chaos, he had no chance to escape, ultimately transforming him into an ordinary zombie, just like all the rest. He was just another face in the crowd, moving in sync with the masses, until one fateful day when armed humans emerged, weapons drawn, targeting them all. Zombies were ruthlessly exterminated, treated like pests to be eradicated. Their bodies were burned for fuel, while the survivors were repurposed as engines for endless energy mechanisms. In this grim reality, zombies had become a source of electricity for humanity. Yet the protagonist found himself grappling with a haunting question. Why did humans harbor such hatred for zombies? And what drove the zombies to crave human flesh? Determined to survive, he resolved to transform his lifestyle and embarked on a rigorous training regimen. Every day, without exception, he lifted weights, ran, swam, and jumped. He understood that an independent life is forged through personal effort, and he chose not to consume meat. Instead, his meals revolved around whey protein, which he diligently consumed 3 times a day. Despite his overwhelming exhaustion, he pushed himself to train late into the night. Eventually, his relentless efforts paid off, and he emerged as a force to be reckoned with, practically invincible, with a physique that was both striking and terrifyingly powerful. Armed with newfound strength and wisdom, he set his sights on the nearest human city, determined to change their perception of zombies. His desire was simple, to live within human walls and be a good zombie. Inside his home, he went about his daily chores, only to realize that his food supplies had run dry. It was time to venture out to the market for a much-needed restock. The day outside was beautiful, with a clear and bright sky beckoning him. He made his way to the familiar market, ready to replenish his supplies. The clerk who assisted him inquired if wearing the mask constantly was uncomfortable. The protagonist responded, surprising her that it was actually quite comfortable. Meanwhile, the employees headed to the truck to load his purchased goods. A suspicious glint caught his eye, revealing that he was being watched. A group of journalists lingered nearby, eager to confirm if it was truly him. They were eager to uncover what lay beneath the mask, diligently searching for any clues about the zombie's identity. As he held a flyer in his hand, he realized that one of his friends was once again in the spotlight. That friend was Goo, who had likely managed to provoke humanity yet again. The cameraman couldn't help but wonder if this was truly the same person who had once stopped an airplane with his bare hands, while his boss conceded that they might be mistaken. Perhaps it had all been a media exaggeration. That was why they needed to uncover the identity of this masked figure. Yet, what they witnessed was so absurd that it left them utterly speechless. The citizen they had been observing had just lifted a truck with his bare hands. The protagonist gazed upward, as if calculating a trajectory. The ground beneath his feet began to fracture, and in an instant, the truck soared several meters into the air. It was such an astonishing sight that the journalist struggled to grasp what had just unfolded. The protagonist's leap was so powerful that he had effectively reached the edge of orbit. Meanwhile, in the distance, a heavily guarded fence loomed, marked with clear warnings that passage was strictly prohibited. On the other side of the fence, a group of erratic zombies meandered aimlessly. In a hauntingly innocent tone, a child told its mother that it was hungry. The mother gently urged the little one to hold on just a bit longer. Was it possible for zombies to reproduce? Don't ask how. Under the glow of the moonlight, a formidable zombie crashed into the heart of the ravaged city, leaving chaos in its wake. On his back rested a truck brimming with supplies, carefully positioned on the ground. The sight sparked joy among the zombies, who recognized that their king had returned. A curious child wondered aloud why he didn't simply drive the truck like a human. The answer was simple. He didn't have a driver's license, so he had to resort to this unconventional method. This was a city he had conquered himself, far removed from human villages, where zombies fed on eggs to avoid attacking people. Turning to the child, he inquired about the whereabouts of Goo and the others. The little one replied that they were all in the hotel hall. The protagonist made his way there, eager to reunite with these extraordinary beings. Upon entering, he was struck by the sheer presence of those gathered. Each one radiated an immense threat level. The mere assembly of such powerful entities was a calamity in itself. What was even more astonishing, however, was that they all greeted him as their supreme majesty. Handing a flyer to one of his subordinates, he revealed that Goo was once again being hunted by humans. The powerful creature expressed his regret, admitting that he always lost control whenever he encountered a human. The protagonist settled onto his sofa, contemplating the situation. One of his subordinates reported that their numbers were increasing, but to remain hidden from humans, they had already relocated several times. The most reckless among them was itching to start a massacre, eager to rev up his chainsaw at any moment. As he voiced his intentions, the protagonist interjected, cautioning that humans could be unpredictable. But before the conversation could deepen, a strange sound pierced the air above the city. An aircraft was hurtling toward them at breakneck speed. Inside, a woman sat calmly, flanked by two exceptionally well-mannered twins. One could easily discern her health and refined upbringing just by looking at her. The woman stood inside the aircraft, exuding confidence as if she were the true protagonist of this tale. She appeared focused, analyzing data on a massive screen and reviewing the details of the current mission. Her staff assured the president that everything was in order, clear and stable, with no signs of interference. The equipment was primed for deployment, and the payload had been thoroughly checked, a nuclear weapon programmed to detonate 20 minutes after activation. Meanwhile, the protagonist sensed an unusual approach from the humans below. High above, inside the aircraft, the formidable president crossed her arms, cradling her twins close to her. She could hardly contain her anticipation for the zombies to feel the devastating power of her nuclear weapon. Her hatred for them burned fiercely. As the aircraft approached, the roar of its engines grew deafening. One of the creatures sensed the threat and alerted the others that humans were behind the noise. Eager to impress his leader, he sought permission to eliminate them all, but the protagonist had other priorities. Evacuating the citizens came first. His subordinate struggled to maintain his composure, having lost control far too easily. In the face of this crisis, the weight of responsibility rested squarely on his shoulders. Inside the aircraft, the president reached out to the ground team, urgently relaying the message. She informed the soldiers that they had just 20 minutes to rescue any remaining civilians and evacuate the area. As she repeated the order, the squad acknowledged with a firm confirmation, ready to act. At one of the aircraft's exits stood Marshall, one of humanity's greatest heroes, renowned for his ability to intercept any formidable zombie that dared to appear. Clad in an impressive suit of armor and wielding a formidable sword, he awaited the action with unwavering patience. He assured the president that she could entrust everything to him. If any powerful zombie emerged, he would cut it down without a moment's hesitation. On the ground, the massive creatures desperately continued their flight. Meanwhile, a mysterious man with long hair observed from a distance. A peculiar-looking boy approached his superior, Faye, and reported that the people from the Extraordinary Academy had discovered their zombies. It was a thrilling turn of events, as it meant they would finally have the chance to toy with these unsuspecting individuals. With a press of a button, a cage materialized, revealing a group of imprisoned humans. They were released right in the heart of the zombie horde. The ground team detected human life signals and swiftly prepared to move to that location. Positioned strategically with their machine guns, they opened fire. In a reckless act that defied safety protocol, a girl removed her protective helmet, frustration boiling over as she faced a zombie that simply refused to die. The frightened zombie boy squeezed his eyes shut, certain he was about to face death once more. Yet, standing before him was the formidable protagonist, radiating such immense power that even his ordinary clothes seemed to transform into bulletproof armor. A resolute soldier, unwilling to accept the existence of invulnerable zombies, decided it was time to unleash his bazooka and let it sing the song of his people. He unleashed a devastating blast of firepower at the creature. A massive explosion erupted, just as the soldiers had anticipated, and thick smoke quickly filled the air. One soldier approached his superior, suggesting that this might not be an ordinary zombie, but rather an extraordinary individual renowned for saving lives. He was famous for wearing an incredibly realistic mask that made him look like a zombie. The soldier's fear gripped him as he realized he might have attacked the wrong person. As the smoke began to clear, the protagonist emerged unscathed from the chaos that had unfolded. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, the president meticulously analyzed the conflict data. She turned to Marshall, her expression grave, and reported that a formidable zombie had appeared in the combat zone. The warrior swiftly insisted on taking matters into his own hands. Without a moment's hesitation, he leaped from the aircraft, plunging directly into the fray. Meanwhile, in a shadowy corner, the enigmatic figures continued their watchful vigil. They observed that nearly everyone had already been rescued, prompting a realization. Perhaps they had underestimated their adversaries. The long-haired man announced that it was time to spice things up. Instantly, the rat-faced young man grasped their intentions. Amidst the throng of zombies, they activated a device that began to alter one of the creatures. Its eyes glowed ominously, and one of its arms began to swell uncontrollably. What had once been an ordinary zombie was now morphing into a colossal and terrifying monstrosity. The protagonist stood firm, shielding his friends as he witnessed a terrifying transformation unfold before him. Amid the chaos, a monstrous creature rampaged, while an armored figure charged onto the battlefield. The ground squad received urgent news of a boss-level zombie's emergence, prompting them to swiftly prepare for the impending threat. To everyone's astonishment, the squad leader ordered an immediate retreat without a moment's hesitation. However, his intentions soon became clear, though they were still tinged with remorse. If his goal was to save that extraordinary person, he had no other choice. Cradling the protagonist in his arms, he moved further away from the heart of danger. He carefully placed him inside the evacuation vehicle. Once they were secure in the armored transporter, he urged the driver to accelerate immediately. There were lives to save. The vehicle roared to life, speeding away with a high-pitched screech. Inside the military truck, the girl couldn't contain her curiosity about the masked figure. Who is he? And why does he always wear that mask? She asked, her eyes wide with intrigue. Caught off guard by her directness, the protagonist struggled to find an answer. Meanwhile, chaos reigned on the battlefield as the ground troops stood frozen in disbelief. The monstrous zombie had just lifted an entire bus with ease. Its strength was so overwhelming that it twisted the vehicle toward the soldiers as if it were made of paper. Just as disaster loomed, a samurai warrior appeared on the battlefield. With a single swing of his blade, he sliced the bus cleanly in two. The wreckage crashed to the ground, showcasing the precision of his strike. The soldiers erupted in cheers. With the samurai from the academy present, victory felt assured. As he approached the creature, he commanded the soldiers to proceed with the evacuation. The monster was now his responsibility. Civilians were being evacuated gradually, and the squad leader received word that the dangerous zombie had already been intercepted. Amid the chaos, the protagonist heard a voice that struck a chord of familiarity deep within him. The girl offered him a reassuring smile, urging him not to worry. They were there to help. But then, something unsettling caught his attention. The mass of humanity they had fought so hard to save had vanished. Turning to the creature before him, Marshall asked if it felt any pain. In response, the zombie let out a deafening roar, a raw expression of uncontrollable rage. It was clear that the creature had lost all control, behaving like a wild beast as it lunged at the samurai. The warrior readied himself to draw his sword. In a blur faster than the eye could follow, the samurai moved past the beast, his blade already sheathed. In an instant, he had delivered countless cuts, resolute in his mission to end its suffering. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Marshall executed the battle with precision, his every move flawless. The zombie's body began to show the devastating effects of his strikes, and soon it collapsed, torn apart and lifeless. As he slowly wiped his blade clean, he felt a sense of finality wash over him. Gazing at the remains on the ground, he couldn't help but wish that the poor creature could finally find peace. But then the sound of footsteps drew his attention. Someone else was approaching. As the unknown figure neared the fallen creature, he couldn't help but wonder if this was yet another zombie. The protagonist's gaze fell on his former companion, grief etched across his face. Meanwhile, inside the support aircraft, the rest of the team received confirmation that the zombie had been completely eliminated. The president congratulated Marshall on his achievement, proposing they document the event as part of his legacy. The protagonist, however, offered an apology for the recent events, acknowledging that not everyone was capable of controlling their actions. When he heard the mysterious figure refer to himself in the plural, Marshall immediately jumped to the conclusion that he was a zombie too. Without a moment's hesitation, he launched his first strike against the protagonist. At that moment, the support team detected the emergence of yet another boss-level zombie. The young officer dismissed it with a shrug, assuring everyone that there was no need for concern. Just give Marshall the order, and he would handle it. But the girl was already gripped by fear. The samurai's signal had vanished without a trace. It had all happened so quickly that even the president began to feel a sense of unease about what might have transpired. Marshall's face bore the marks of a brutal blow, his body suspended from the top of a streetlight, stripped of the armor that once protected him. His life signals flickered weakly, a testament to the severe damage he had endured. The situation for the remaining humans was growing increasingly desperate, with evacuation efforts still incomplete. As he surveyed the unfolding crisis, the president's anger boiled over, a deep and genuine fury igniting within him. Someone had to act to avert disaster. Shocking her entire team, she leaped from the aircraft, plunging straight into the fray. Her teammates shouted in alarm, warning her of the recklessness of her decision. She couldn't possibly face this alone. But as she descended, she was already gearing up for her first strike, resolute in her determination to gauge the creature's strength firsthand. The protagonist was taken by surprise. He hadn't anticipated encountering another human so soon. The president, however, was even more bewildered. Her blade had shattered as if it were made of glass. She paused, trying to grasp the reality of the situation, while the protagonist merely felt a faint poke on his head. Now, genuine fear washed over her as she struggled to understand what kind of being could possess a body as unyielding as steel. Realizing he was far stronger than she had initially thought, she began to distance herself from him. Her team cautioned her that, due to the overwhelming power of her initial strike, they couldn't send reinforcements to help. Sheathing the remnants of her shattered blade, the president reassured them that she was fine. Seizing this fleeting moment, the protagonist attempted to apologize, mentioning that he had already done so with the samurai. She was taken aback by his ability to speak, realizing that this creature must be some sort of mutant. This revelation only compelled her to draw an even more formidable weapon. With her enchanted blade at the ready, the president braced herself for another devastating strike. Meanwhile, the protagonist felt a surge of desperation. He didn't want to fight. He wished she would simply listen. Filled with determination, the president boldly declared that he could face the edge of her sword. Her initial attack fell short, easily dodged by him. Yet this was far from the end of their clash. She swiftly repositioned herself, now lurking behind him. He sensed her presence, ready to strike again. Executing one of her signature moves, the president unleashed a sweeping slash. Her blade cut through everything in its path, leaving destruction in its wake. Yet, in a stunning display of agility, the protagonist evaded the attack with a matrix-like grace. The force of the strike was so immense that even the surrounding buildings bore the brunt of the damage. Everything unfolded in a blur, and the protagonist couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for her incredible combat prowess. The president's frustration mounted as she believed the creature was simply toying with her. Nearby, soldiers worked tirelessly to retrieve injured samurai, one of whom had been so brutally beaten that he could barely utter a word. At last, the president received confirmation that the evacuation had been successfully completed. Now, she too could make her retreat. Deeply immersed in the chaos of battle, one of her assistants urgently inquired if she had heard the order. But by that time, she and the protagonist were already sprinting through the desolate city, moving like shadows. The protagonist did everything in his power to escape the wrathful woman, while the president's fury intensified, realizing that the creature had no intention of fighting back. He realized that if he didn't make a run for it, she would never stop trying to bring him down. With a few agile leaps, the protagonist quickly put some distance between them. This only intensified her rage. Now she was resolved to unveil the second extension of her techniques. In that instant, her legs transformed to reveal prosthetics, and steam began to billow from her body. Now fully powered, the president leaped a tremendous distance in a single bound. The protagonist, believing he had made a clean escape, was caught off guard by her sudden reappearance. With fury blazing in her eyes, she unleashed another devastating attack. After executing her strike, she landed heavily on the ground. Moments later, the protagonist followed suit, crashing down like a sack of potatoes. Convinced her target was thoroughly eliminated, the president sheathed her sword and commanded the aircraft to descend for retrieval. Among those present, the most disheartened was the rat-faced man. After all, every single citizen had been evacuated safely. Yet, the story was far from over. They still had a spy lurking within their organization. The rescued civilians erupted in celebration, their relief palpable after a successful escape. Meanwhile, inside the cockpit, the pilot's instincts kicked in as he sensed something amiss. Turning to the side, he was confronted with a chilling sight. Someone had pressed a button that threatened them all. The nuclear warhead within the aircraft had been launched. Now it was descending, aimed directly at the survivors below. Oblivious to the impending danger, the civilians continued their celebration, believing the mission had concluded. The pilot swiftly alerted the crew that they should be celebrating. But with a chilling twist, there was a spy among them, and the warhead had been deployed. The crew was left in stunned silence, grappling with the grim reality. Meanwhile, the rescued civilians were gripped by sheer terror as the truth sank in. There was little time to warn the president about the traitor in their midst. She needed to escape immediately. Yet the sheer horror of the situation left her paralyzed. A nuclear bomb was hurtling toward the city, and nothing could stop it now. They were doing everything possible to minimize the damage, but extracting the president had become their top priority. She attempted to activate her prosthetic enhancements, but a sinking feeling washed over her. Something was terribly wrong. Time was slipping away, and the president remained outside the aircraft. In that critical moment, she fought to engage the acceleration of her prosthetics, only to realize that their battery had been completely drained during her battle with a mutant she had ultimately failed to defeat. It seemed she had forgotten to replace the power cells in her prosthetics before heading into battle, a truly regrettable oversight. Distracted by her dead batteries, she suddenly noticed the zombie standing right beside her, very much alive. Without a word, he seized her abruptly, offering no explanation. With a swift motion, he began to spin her like a centrifuge, while the president screamed desperately for her to be released. With a tremendous force, the zombie hurled the woman toward the aircraft. She crashed into Carville Bay, landing safely inside. Now, with her crew secured within the aircraft, it was time to make their escape. However, as the president processed what the mutant had just done for her, a wave of distress washed over her. Meanwhile, the nuclear warhead continued its ominous descent toward the abandoned city. The protagonist remained calm and confident, patiently awaiting the approaching threat. Once again, he gathered a significant portion of his strength and shattered the ground beneath him. Launching himself skyward with a powerful leap, he raced toward the ballistic missile, now on a direct collision course. Steadying one hand, he already knew exactly what he was going to do. With the ease of catching a simple baseball, he snatched the projectile from the air with one hand, a feat so astonishing that onlookers were rendered speechless. In an instant, a massive explosion erupted above the city, sending shockwaves that jolted the aircraft into a violent turbulence. Behind them, the iconic mushroom cloud began to ascend into the sky, a haunting reminder of the chaos unleashed. As the president witnessed the utter devastation, she had no way of knowing if her savior had survived. The city, once abandoned, was now utterly obliterated. Buildings that had merely been desolate ruins were now almost entirely erased from existence. All she could do was stare, convinced that nothing could have possibly survived such destruction. Suddenly, a scorched leg appeared from the thick smoke. The protagonist's clothes were nearly obliterated, with only the strategically essential areas remaining intact. He casually scratched a rather private part of his anatomy, seemingly unfazed, as if the nuclear energy had only caused him mild discomfort. After observing this, the long-haired mystery man announced that it was time to leave. However, his assistant noted that there were still life signals within the blast radius. The long-haired man scoffed, dismissing the concern. This wasn't their first battle against the Academy, nor would it be the last. One day, he vowed, he would eliminate them all. Meanwhile, the hero's aircraft set a course back to base. Inside, the president appeared utterly desolate, the weight of their losses heavy on his shoulders. A few crew members approached her, their expressions etched with concern for her well-being. One of them couldn't help but remark on the irony of the situation. She had dedicated her life to battling zombies, only to be rescued by one in the end. Her assistant stepped forward, eager to clarify the confusion. "It's likely a massive misunderstanding," he explained. "The one who saved you isn't a zombie at all. He's a masked hero, a figure of recent renown, and he's been living in the city for quite some time." Clutching a tablet in her hands, the president crushed it in a fit of frustration. Meanwhile, in the city, something unusual caught the attention of the passers-by. A nearly naked man strolled through the streets, seemingly unfazed by the stares he attracted. The protagonist, undeterred, made his way to the nearest telephone booth, once a staple for making calls. These booths were now relics of a bygone era, equipped with landline telephones that felt almost nostalgic. His subordinates reported that everyone was safe and were now searching for a secure place to settle. Delighted by the news, he promised them that he would facilitate their re-emigration as soon as he found a suitable residence. At last, the protagonist arrived at his apartment. He entered the numeric passcode, unlocking the door to his home. Inside the intelligence center, the city's surveillance cameras had finally revealed the location of the masked man. The protagonist glanced sideways, still bewildered by the unfolding events. The women in the room shared his shock as they watched the monitor. The masked man was practically half naked. Once he returned to his apartment, the protagonist hung clothes out to dry, trying to shake off the chaos of the day. Meanwhile, inside, he continued his workout, drawing motivation from a photograph nearby. In it, he stood proudly with the strongest of his allies, a reminder of their bond. He hoped they had found his safe haven, as he longed for the day they would reunite. Suddenly, the president burst through his apartment door, catching him off guard. With a commanding presence, she ordered her men to remove every single piece of furniture. Nothing was to be left behind. Without hesitation, they followed her orders. Shocked, the protagonist demanded to know who they were, threatening to call the police. The president calmly held out a piece of paper, urging him to grasp the significance of the message. They were from the Academy of the Beyond, and they had come to deliver the news. He had been accepted. From that day on, the protagonist officially became a member of their organization. Discreetly, she issued a command to one of the security guards who had been by her side. The man took her hand, leaving her bewildered and unsure of what was happening. He attempted to protest, insisting he was a zombie and couldn't possibly attend school. However, they merely dismissed his claims, convinced he was just a human in an exceptionally convincing disguise. After a brief exchange, they stepped outside. One of the assistants remarked that the situation was somewhat inappropriate. The Academy had stringent selection criteria, and given its highly organized nature, there wouldn't even be a room prepared for his arrival. However, for the president, this was hardly an issue. She simply offered him a place in her apartment. Once inside the president's apartment, the security team set about arranging the furniture in the new space. After what felt like an eternity of heavy lifting, the task was finally complete. The guards politely took their leave, leaving the protagonist standing there, uncertain of his next move. The president watched him intently, while the protagonist grappled with a deep unease about everything that had just transpired. Overwhelmed by embarrassment, he hesitantly inquired whether he would be staying there permanently and, more importantly, where he would be sleeping. To the president, it was clear he would be staying. She couldn't fathom why he kept pressing the issue of sleeping arrangements, even teasingly suggesting he might want to sleep next to her. Flustered, he scrambled to clarify, insisting that wasn't his intention at all. She must have misunderstood him. All he could think about was how absurd it was for a human and a zombie to share the same bed. Sensing his discomfort, the formidable president reassured him that he would be sleeping in the guest room. With that clarification, he attempted once more to assert his identity, insisting that he was indeed a zombie. Meanwhile, the president began adjusting her prosthetic legs, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving. That immediately caught the protagonist's attention. He hadn't noticed them before. As she removed one of her prosthetics, a wave of panic washed over him. "What happened to your legs?" he demanded, concern etched across his face. With a casual air, she replied, "I cut them off myself." Then, tilting her head, she added, "Do you have a problem with that?" Without missing a beat, he quickly assured her, "No, not at all." She let out a deep sigh, her mind drifting back to the harrowing events that had shaped her decision. The zombie outbreak had struck when she was just a child. Her parents were infected almost immediately, and in a tragic twist, they bit her legs. To survive, she was forced to confront the unimaginable, defeating her own parents and severing her own legs. This was the reason behind her profound and unwavering hatred for all zombies, a hatred that fueled her relentless quest for their complete extermination. After this brief yet revealing explanation, the protagonist felt a wave of nervousness wash over him, understanding that it would be wise to steer clear of certain subjects. Realizing she had interrupted him earlier, she inquired about what he had been saying. He dismissed it casually, insisting it was nothing more than nonsense, and that it was better she hadn't heard it. Quickly shifting the conversation, he inquired about the Academy of the Beyond. Violet, the president, explained that it was an organization dedicated to perfecting methods for combating zombies. It had been established over 1,000 years ago, founded 2 centuries after the first outbreak of the zombie pandemic. Its sole purpose was to battle the creatures, and over the centuries it had nurtured countless talents. The protagonist's memories were hazy, but one thing was clear. He had become a zombie during the very first outbreak. Reflecting on this, he realized he had been a zombie for nearly a millennium. Violet urged him to be ready for what lay ahead the following day. She had leveraged her connections to secure his immediate enlistment. His expression was one of deep distrust. More than anything, he wanted to avoid showing up. But Violet had made it clear running away was not an option. This was no ordinary organization. Attempting to escape would set off a massive investigation into his identity. At last, she unveiled her name, Violet. She also mentioned that a girl named Dawn would be escorting him to the academy the following day, adding that they were already acquainted. Intrigued, the protagonist insisted he didn't know anyone named Dawn. Just then, he spotted a familiar head of hair in the distance, paired with slightly revealing attire. Dawn greeted the new student with a polite smile, while the protagonist struggled with his own turmoil. He stared at her, unable to place her, which only heightened his irritation. He had completely blanked on everything that happened inside the armored vehicle. In truth, he remembered it all too well. But in his memories, she had seemed much smaller. Upon hearing this, Dawn struggled to suppress her frustration at her future classmates' apparent cluelessness. She urged him to hurry. The entrance exam was fast approaching. Together, they climbed the stairs leading to the plaza in front of the academy. He was unaware that he wouldn't actually have to take the exam. Dawn reassured him that it was essential to assess the students' physical abilities and their skills in exterminating zombies. She referenced an old world record for the 100-meter dash as a benchmark. To gain acceptance into the academy, one had to run faster than that record. Suddenly, the name Academy of the Beyond took on new meaning for Dawn. He realized he should have understood that this was a place for extraordinary individuals. In his mind, however, the academy was likely filled with lunatics. This academy felt more like a glorified asylum. Welcome banners fluttered in the breeze, and a massive crowd of students had gathered for the exam. As Dawn scanned the scene, she couldn't shake the feeling that it all seemed genuinely perilous. With so many bodies pressing in around her, she decided to climb onto her classmates' shoulders for a better view. An irate man, perhaps fueled by his baldness, shouted at her to be quiet, insisting that people like them should keep their distance. As their argument escalated, the protagonist pondered whether someone capable of lifting an entire airplane should even need to take the exam. But it wasn't that straightforward. Many individuals present were capable of such extraordinary feats. And then, there was one small detail to consider. At the academy, television news was hardly a topic of interest. A man with a wooden leg began to ascend the stairs, urging everyone to remain calm. Clearing his throat, he took hold of the microphone. With a warm welcome, he introduced himself as Chen, the examiner for the day and the president of the sports department. He proudly noted that the academy had a rich history spanning 800 years, having nurtured countless great talents along the way. In the old days, the founders possessed the power to split entire mountains in half. Today, however, President Chen didn't expect the candidates to replicate such feats. Amidst the crowd, a voice called out to him. It was none other than the beloved protagonist, timidly raising his hand to ask a question. With a hint of nervousness, he inquired, what would happen if a zombie were to wander into the academy? The answer was chillingly simple. The zombie would be completely dismembered. Its body hung from the academy gates after being neutralized. The protagonist was baffled by that last word. What did neutralized even mean? Professor Chen clarified, explaining that it referred to separating the smaller head from the larger body of the zombie. Just the thought of such suffering sent a wave of horror through the protagonist, leaving him frozen in place. At last, the exams commenced, kicking off with the 100-meter sprint. The students lined up, anticipation buzzing in the air as they awaited the referee's signal. With a sharp crack of the starter pistol, the race was on. The sheer force of their sprinting created a whirlwind that momentarily distorted the referee's features. Among the competitors, one student surged ahead, showcasing remarkable speed and clearly taking the lead in the race. The boy shot forward like a lightning bolt, crossing the finish line in a mere 3 seconds. As he slowed down, he tore up the ground beneath him, while the protagonist focused on running as discreetly as possible. Next came the targeting exam, where they would need to hit designated targets. In a world plagued by zombies, shooting was regarded as the most fundamental survival skill. Somehow, the protagonist found himself caught up in the evaluation, utterly bewildered about how he ended up in this predicament. As he prepared to take aim, he watched his classmates' techniques unfold. Dawn, in particular, displayed remarkable proficiency with her weapons, her skills far surpassing the average. She launched several knives at the targets, each blade striking true and slicing through the bullseyes with astonishing precision, as if guided by an unseen hand. After achieving such a flawless result, she flashed a small smile, having passed the exam with flying colors. Meanwhile, the protagonist grappled with the challenge of properly using a firearm. He couldn't help but notice the energetic demeanor of the other examiners, which gradually eased his nerves. He recalled Director Chen's words, reminding himself that he was likely the only zombie in the entire city. The next test was a straightforward throwing event. Candidates were required to hurl objects a minimum of 80 meters to pass, with throws of 100 meters or more elevating them to the top tier. As the first few candidates stepped up, it became clear that this challenge was tougher than the previous ones, and some students began to falter. The director summoned the next group, and the protagonist found himself surrounded by these unpredictable competitors. To avoid drawing too much attention, he meticulously controlled his strength. As he completed the tests, Director Chen scrutinized the protagonist's statistics, realizing he was only doing the bare minimum to pass. Yet, he had received a direct message from Violet, who had assured him that this boy was exceptionally strong. Trusting the president's word, Director Chen was convinced that this young man was destined for greatness. The only explanation for his underwhelming performance was that he was intentionally feigning weakness. As the final test approached, one of the candidates stepped forward, poised to launch his spear. He concentrated, channeling his energy into the projectile, and with a swift motion, the spear shot through the air like a bullet. It raced toward its target with astonishing speed, but unfortunately, it struck the training dummy in a particularly vulnerable spot. Watching that scene only heightened the protagonist's anxiety about being discovered. The throw was so powerful that the spear carried multiple dummies along with it, all of them ultimately impaled against a traffic sign. In the heart of the city, unsuspecting bystanders were left stunned by the unexpected sight of flying training dummies. Even Director Chen was impressed. This candidate's spear had soared an astonishing 32 kilometers of performance that surely qualified him. Now, it was the protagonist's turn. As he approached the test area, the promising candidate who had just thrown his spear tried to intimidate him. Unfazed, the protagonist calmly picked up the spear. He glanced upward, mentally bracing himself for the throw. But just as he was about to act, Director Chen commanded him to halt. This unexpected interruption drew the attention of the other candidates, as he had not disrupted anyone else throughout the entire exam. The director had a question to confirm. Was this truly the man known as Zombie, personally endorsed by the president of fencing? She believed he was incredibly strong, yet his exam statistics told a different story. The director was curious if he was concealing his true potential. After all, this was the same individual who had previously inquired about zombies. Everyone around him was pushing themselves to the limit to succeed, so the director needed to know if he was truly doing the same. Under the intense scrutiny, the protagonist felt a wave of panic wash over him as he frantically insisted, "I assure you, I'm definitely a person." Without a doubt, he was a real human being. If that were the case, then the director had instructed him to demonstrate the full extent of his potential. He didn't need to exceed 32 kilometers. Throwing at least 10% of that would be enough to qualify. If he failed, the director would suspect he had deceived the president, branding him a potential spy, one who would face severe consequences. Terrified, the protagonist's mind raced. He still harbored a deep fear of humans, having spent centuries evading them. The thought of being enslaved again haunted him, yet he had persevered all this time with a singular purpose. With newfound determination, he resolved to hurl the spear as far as he could. The unusual interaction with the director had drawn all eyes to him, heightening the tension in the air. For the first time during the exam, he focused with unwavering determination. Memories of his grueling strength training flooded his mind, the sting of the bench press, the relentless struggle of countless failed bicep curls. The raw power within him surged, building so intensely that the ground beneath him began to fracture. Then, with a fierce throw, he launched the spear. A colossal shockwave erupted from the impact, sending a ripple of intimidation through the other candidates. His throw was so powerful that it obliterated a satellite in Earth's orbit. If it weren't for the moon acting as a barrier, the spear would have soared into the depths of space. The sheer force of his throw violently hurled multiple candidates across the field, leaving the ground beneath them completely shattered. Faced with such an overwhelming display of raw strength, even Director Chen was left utterly speechless. In truth, if one could observe the moon up close, they would see the scars left behind, damage wrought by just a fraction of the protagonist's power. After a shockwave rippled through the air, remnants began to rain down from the sky, as if failures themselves were plummeting to Earth. The protagonist took a moment to collect himself, his expression transformed by the sheer intensity of the recent events. He gazed up at the moon, still hanging in the sky, convinced that his spear had been on a direct path toward it. Gradually, he regained his usual composure. Meanwhile, those around him remained utterly astonished. Dawn approached, her excitement palpable as she marveled at his achievement. Even the director stood in silence, rendered speechless. She longed to know just how far the spear could have flown, but he had no answer to offer. He had simply done his best. Meanwhile, in the vastness of space, a fragment of the moon drifted aimlessly, transformed into a lonely asteroid. It was far from pleased with its current predicament. Now that he had officially qualified the protagonist, he hoped to finally return home. However, Dawn found that notion absurd. With such power at his disposal, he could one day become president. Filled with excitement about his potential, she asked if he understood just how much power a president could wield. As he pondered this, he realized he knew very little about human society. The most striking example was Violet herself. Her authority enabled her to command a vast army, giving her access to even nuclear weapons. Moreover, she held supreme authority over a city of 30 million people. Though an elected official technically held the title, he was merely a secretary. The true power lay with her. The protagonist tried to point out that he already governed his own city, but Dawn dismissed him entirely, steering him in a different direction. They soon arrived at the biotechnology department, the hub where special weapons were forged, also known as the logistics department. As they wandered through the facility, something unusual caught the protagonist's attention. Before him lay a small photograph of a seemingly happy family. This picture belonged to Professor Jamie, who was thought to be dead. Once the president of this department, he had spiraled into obsession after losing his wife, diving headfirst into wild experiments that blurred the lines between humanity and the undead. As a result of his unraveling sanity, he had been dismissed from his position. Just then, a woman in glasses approached them, inquiring if they were new students and whether they had passed the academy's entrance exam. To their relief, they confirmed that they had both been officially admitted. Curious, Zombie asked who this woman was. Dawn replied that she was Professor Jamie's adopted daughter and the current head of the biotechnology department. Inviting them to take a seat, she inquired about the equipment they would need. With a spark of excitement in her eyes, Dawn eagerly requested something that would enable her to carry even more weapons. Her playful imagination conjured the image of a skirt that could conceal a massive machine gun. In short, she was ready to join the ranks of the gunners. The scientist then turned to the protagonist, curious about his own desires. After posing her question, she was met with silence. Zombie, revealing his deep-seated insecurities, timidly inquired if she had truly been speaking to him. As she took a closer look at his face, her expression shifted to one of sheer terror. It dawned on her that he was, in fact, a zombie. Yet Dawn, still wearing a smile, quickly dismissed her fear, insisting it was merely an incredibly realistic mask. The scientist, now thoroughly alarmed, questioned whether Dawn was simply being foolish or deliberately ignoring the truth. It was unmistakably a zombie. Meanwhile, the creature trembled in fear. Dawn, unwavering, insisted she wasn't lying. She had glimpsed part of its face during the last exam. With a hint of calm returning, the scientist hesitated, weighing her words carefully. If he were truly a zombie, wouldn't he have attacked someone by now? Yet she pressed on with her question. What kind of equipment did he need? After a moment of contemplation, he replied, "Whenever I use my strength, I always end up going home naked." His request was straightforward. He wanted clothes that would never tear. An unusual request made the scientist pause in contemplation. She jotted down the peculiar demands: a girl wishing to carry more weapons and a zombie who simply wanted to avoid ending up naked. Meanwhile, in the reserved fencing area, a group was deep in discussion. Among them was Marshall, who had been thoroughly defeated by the protagonist. Nearby, a woman reclined on a bench, a book shielding her face as she awaited the report. The samurai revealed the true strength of his opponent. The instant he launched his attack, darkness enveloped his vision. In the blink of an eye, he found himself suspended from a streetlight. The woman, intrigued, asked if the president of his division could possibly defeat such a formidable creature. Without a moment's pause, the samurai conceded that this being was even more powerful than his own president. At last, the woman sat up, slamming her book onto the table. She demanded to know the name of the person who had defeated him. A blue-haired woman leaned in, her curiosity piqued as she awaited the answer. Once she heard it, she waved him off, declaring he was free to go. Her name was John Lanky, the president of the Sword Division. A fierce rivalry simmered between the Sword Division and the Blade Division. As he departed, the samurai offered her a warm farewell, wishing her a good day. Meanwhile, in theory class, students delved into the peculiar habits of zombies. To their surprise, they learned that zombies had a penchant for eating eggs, a revelation that could be cleverly exploited for setting traps. Among them, Zombie stood out as a dedicated student, diligently jotting down every detail he encountered. Don's curiosity piqued as he leaned in to see what was being written. "What are you working on?" he asked. The response surprised him. He wanted to share this knowledge with his family. Of all the things he could have said, this was certainly not what she had anticipated. Just then, a loud announcement reverberated through the school, summoning everyone to the gymnasium immediately. Don found this sudden gathering rather peculiar. It hadn't been long since their last gathering, yet students began to trickle into the center of the gym. Curiosity peeped as they casually enjoyed their ice cream. Violet, determined to restore order, commanded silence. Meanwhile, Don marveled at how his classmate managed to eat while wearing a mask. He attempted to explain the logistics of it, but his words were interrupted as a group of individuals approached. The blue-haired girl observed the protagonist from afar, her expression one of indifference. Having seen him fall in battle before, she doubted his strength. "Should I go over and test this boy?" she asked, glancing at her president for confirmation. With a nod of approval, she swiftly unsheathed her sword. But just as she prepared to make her move, a new group of individuals burst into the gymnasium, interrupting the tense moment. At the forefront stood the chief, flanked by an army of robots. His mere presence commanded the attention of all the students, prompting them to spring into action. Dawn quickly instructed her classmate to stop staring and bow. This was the Department of Mechanical Life, and as the machines filled the hall, a hush fell over the crowd. The president exchanged brief glances, a mix of awe and apprehension in his eyes. He cautioned the girl against stirring up any trouble in that place. In response to their reprimand, she announced her intention to leave. However, as she walked away, she inquired whether they still intended to test the boy's abilities. But plans shifted swiftly. The chief held far more significance than this boy, and she only respected those who were truly strong. The chief then approached Violet, recognizing her hard work. She merely replied that it was all part of her job. Zombie couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing between the two of them. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Turning to his classmate, he asked, "Is the chief really that powerful?" Don nodded, recalling Professor Jamie, the man who had been exiled from the academy. "The chief is an enhanced version of a modern human," he explained. "He's the masterpiece of that mad professor. The sole survivor of countless brutal experiments, he now presided over a city of 50 million inhabitants. In his decade of leadership, not a single zombie had emerged within his domain. Even the faintest glimpse of a stray zombie hair prompted a swift and ruthless cleansing of the area. As he stepped onto the stage, the chief declared that his address would be brief. Despite being newcomers, the academy was in dire need of assistance. The students sat in complete silence, their attention fixed on their instructor. He gestured toward one of his machines and commanded an immediate projection. From what appeared to be an eye on his face, a hologram of a seated figure materialized. This was a spy they had captured months ago, a man whose actions had nearly led to a nuclear disaster. Zombie seethed with rage. This was the man who had unleashed a nuclear weapon upon him. While the spy certainly deserved punishment, he held information far too valuable to simply discard. He was a loyal subordinate of Professor Jamie. The protagonist came to a stark realization. There was more than one enemy threatening humanity. In the present day, the immediate threat of zombies had lessened, but new dangers loomed on the horizon. The greatest threat to humanity was humanity itself. It was evident that some individuals simply wanted to watch the world burn. Countless interrogation methods had been employed, yet none had proven effective. Even the senior students had failed to extract a single word from him. No matter how brutal the approach, the spy remained resolute. Frustrated, the chief had no choice but to turn to the newcomers for a fresh perspective. Any assistance would be appreciated. Whoever could get him to talk would be instantly promoted to vice president. The newcomer's eyes sparkled at the prospect of power, and a large crowd eagerly stepped forward to interrogate the spy. Observing their enthusiasm, the chief announced that the prisoner was waiting in a room outside and wished them all good luck. 2 hours had passed, and the situation remained stagnant. The newcomers, eager to extract information, resorted to increasingly unorthodox methods of interrogation. Violet, resting her chin on her hand, watched with a look of disdain, unimpressed by their futile attempts. Meanwhile, Dawn pondered whether her new friend could coax the prisoner into talking. The truth was, if he truly wanted to, Zombie could make the man sing like a canary. Hearing those words only fueled Dawn's excitement. Raising her hand, she called for the chief's attention, declaring that her friend had a method to make the spy talk. With nothing to lose, the chief promptly led them to the interrogation room. Yet, amid her enthusiasm, Dawn couldn't shake the feeling of Zombie's sudden loneliness. It felt oddly out of place. Until now, he had been trying to remain unnoticed. Zombie subordinates were typically obedient, but recently a few had begun to lose their grip. Perhaps this year would bring some clarity. As he entered the room, he found himself face to face with the prisoner. On the opposite side, the spy showed no signs of surprise. He merely acknowledged the arrival of yet another visitor. The protagonist stepped forward, his gaze locked onto the prisoner, who regarded him with wary eyes. They held each other's stare in silence for a brief moment. The spy, convinced that the academy had exhausted its pool of interrogators, firmly declared that he would never betray his brother Faye. But as soon as the words left his lips, Zombie sprang into action. In an instant, he made a swift, precise cut on the spy's arm. After enduring countless interrogation sessions, the spy found himself bewildered by the significance of such a tiny wound. He erupted into hysterical laughter, unafraid of anything. To him, it was merely a mosquito bite. Without hesitation, Zombie issued a simple command: "Stand up." The spy obeyed instinctively, his mind still reeling. This immediately captured the attention of every key figure in the room. Something within that tiny wound compelled him to comply. Microscopic cells had infiltrated the spy's bloodstream, swiftly coursing through his body and already reaching his brain. The spy trembled not from fear, but from the complete loss of control over himself. He no longer had any control over his own existence. The first question from the zombie was straightforward: his name. The answer came without hesitation, Shokai. Dawn was taken aback. She had just witnessed her friend's power to manipulate someone's mind. Assuming that, as Jamie's subordinate, the spy must possess a wealth of knowledge, the protagonist inquired if that was indeed the case. The young man confidently asserted that he knew nearly everything. With this revelation, Zombie pressed for answers about why the zombies were losing control. The explanation was chilling. A drug had been covertly released into the city. Zombies that ingested it would go into a frenzy, and in some instances, they could even be controlled remotely. These manipulated zombies were unleashed to attack humans, allowing their creators to gather combat data for analysis at the Academy of the Beyond. The protagonist pressed for answers, demanding to know the reason behind their actions. The spy, uncertain of the complete truth, could only share that his superior was filled with enthusiasm. Jamie was busy collecting vital information for an undisclosed purpose. When asked about Jamie's current whereabouts, the spy disclosed that he was stationed in a secret base, 500 meters underground beneath a city-like structure. Upon hearing this, Zombie commanded the spy to turn his back to him. As he exited the room, he muttered in a guttural tone, lamenting that humans were hateful creatures. He warned that the virus nestled in the spy's brain could extinguish his life at any moment. Yet he harbored a flicker of hope that the man could alter his fate. The spy grasped the weight of his words as the door closed behind the protagonist. Meanwhile, Professor Jamie was precisely where the spy had indicated. They had received intel that their captured agent had divulged crucial information. The Academy of the Beyond likely knew their exact location now, yet Jamie remained lost in thought. This revelation didn't concern him. Their research had to continue. In fact, he felt a sense of anticipation at the thought of the Academy coming to him. His assistant was in a state of panic. This was far too dangerous. Yet, as the experiment neared completion, Jamie remained unfazed. Approaching one of his creations, he proclaimed that the timing was perfect. He wanted his enemies to witness this historic moment, the birth of a new form of life. Then, with an eerie calm, the zombies stepped out of the interrogation room as if nothing had happened. Outside, the other students watched him with a mix of fear and awe. Whispers rippled through the crowd, fueled by those who had witnessed his display of power. Even Violet appeared unsettled, the reality of his abilities beginning to dawn on her. The blue-haired woman, too, was captivated by the events that had unfolded. It was clear everyone now believed he possessed the uncanny ability to control minds. The chief began to clap, praising Zombie for his outstanding performance. He confidently declared that this new generation would surpass the old one, admitting he had not anticipated such talent emerging among the freshmen. True to his word, he promised to appoint Zombie as vice president, but only once he was officially registered. Yet, amidst the accolades, Zombie's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake his concern for Jamie's whereabouts. The chief, however, was confident he wouldn't escape. They continued their walk, closely monitored by the blue-haired woman. Her subordinate found the situation odd. There was no established procedure for becoming vice president. Curiosity piqued. They decided to follow. The group ventured into an isolated industrial zone. Zombie was bewildered as to why they had come here. He had assumed they were simply heading to complete his registration. Suddenly, the chief turned to him and asked, "When did you learn to speak human language?" It was clear he knew Zombie was, in fact, a zombie. Confusion washed over Zombie. Was the chief really addressing him? As he turned to face him, the chief raised his weapon, tension crackling in the air. "Yes, I'm talking to you," he said before pulling the trigger. A powerful shot struck Zombie directly. The blue-haired woman and her subordinate, hidden nearby, nearly caught the brunt of the blast. By some miracle, they emerged unscathed. The weapon used was the chief's tachyon cannon, a device capable of disintegrating any form of matter. The chief vowed he would never be deceived by a zombie again. He couldn't fathom what the fools at the academy were thinking. How could they have let something like this slip by? Yet, in the grand scheme of things, it hardly mattered. All zombies shared a singular weakness, their heads. Once destroyed, they ceased to move. This particular zombie had ventured into territory it never should have dared to enter. The protagonist's hand shot toward the chief's face in a blur of motion. In an instant, a wall shattered, sending debris cascading through the air. The chief gasped as Zombie's hand tightened around his throat. Just then, other figures emerged from the shadows. The robots that always accompanied the chief materialized in an instant, ready to respond. They unleashed their powerful beams without hesitation, resulting in a massive explosion that engulfed the entire area. As the smoke began to clear, the protagonist emerged, gripping the remnants of a destroyed combat drone. Meanwhile, taking advantage of the chaos, the chief had made his escape, leaping to safety. Dragging his feet across the cold concrete, he remained in a state of shock. He struggled to grasp the reality of what had just transpired. His robots lay in ruins, utterly destroyed. That zombie should have been dead. No headless body should be capable of movement. Yet, astonishingly, the headless corpse continued to fight. The blue-bearded woman and her subordinate shared the chief's disbelief, their expressions mirroring his shock. Without uttering a single word, the zombie pressed on, relentless in its assault. The chief had to remain entirely focused, having narrowly escaped decapitation himself. Remarkably, he dodged every attack aimed at him, buying precious time to prepare his cannon once more. He fired a new shot, but this time he missed his target completely. Confusion washed over him as he struggled to comprehend how this headless zombie could be so agile. There was no time for hesitation. He had to concentrate on staying alive. He quickly created distance to evade the zombie's attack. While his subordinate believed he was faltering, the blue-haired woman confidently remarked that the chief was only warming up. Men like him thrived on showcasing their overwhelming strength. It was wise to step back and avoid getting swept up in the chaos. At last, something began to take shape on the zombie's body. His head fully regenerated, leaving everyone in stunned silence. The protagonist seized the moment, suggesting they talk, assuring them he meant no harm to anyone present. The chief remained quiet for a long moment, suddenly aware of a light wound on his neck. Realizing that the zombie's true intention was to seize control of his mind, he resolutely refused to comply. He shed his coat, unveiling his robotic body model number 1. With a firm command, he summoned another robot, which began to approach him. As it drew nearer, its parts detached and seamlessly integrated with his own. A transformation was in progress, and all the protagonist could do was watch in awe. The boy on the rooftop watched in awe, unsure of what he was witnessing. The chief stood before him, clad in sleek, high-tech armor. As a mechanical life form, negotiation with zombies was far from his nature. Yet here he was, and as the first zombie to witness this transformation, the protagonist couldn't help but feel a sense of honor. The chief had become faster and far more powerful, delivering strikes with devastating force. He positioned himself mid-air, preparing to land a crushing blow on the protagonist. The impact was so overwhelming that it sent him soaring high into the sky. The blue-haired woman and her student watched in shock, stunned by the ferocity of the battle. But the chief was far from finished. He had yet to reveal the full extent of his offensive power. As the zombie hung in the air, he unleashed a flurry of strikes, each one precise and brutal. Yet, to his astonishment, the creature showed no sign of reaction. This only fueled the chief's confidence, even as the zombie's body remained unscathed. With a determined roar, he delivered a powerful blow, sending his opponent crashing to the ground. The impact echoed like a soccer ball hitting concrete. Moments later, the chief descended, his resolve clear: all zombies must be eradicated. He crossed his arms over his chest, channeling an energy that promised total annihilation. With a fierce determination, he unleashed a devastating energy beam, one that threatened to consume everything in its path. The blue-haired woman stood frozen, awestruck by the sheer magnitude of his power. It was the same beam he had unleashed earlier, but this time, its power was exponentially greater. Shockwaves rippled through the abandoned city, leaving nothing in their wake that could have withstood such an assault. The chief let out a heavy sigh, fatigue weighing on him from the effort he had just expended. He dared to hope that his enemy was finally vanquished. Yet, as he glanced up, he was met with an unexpected sight. His foe was strolling toward him, completely unfazed. The chief was in disbelief. This shouldn't be possible. For the first time in the battle, the protagonist had changed his approach. He let out a furious roar that reverberated through the air, sending debris flying in all directions. The blue-haired woman instinctively raised her arm to shield herself from the swirling dust, while the chief grimaced, covering his ears against the overwhelming sound. The roar echoed with an intensity that shook the very air. The protagonist had undergone a transformation, defying the conventions of Dragon Ball. Now, he sported a pair of ears and a striking new hairstyle. The onlookers were baffled, unable to comprehend the change that had overtaken the once zombie figure. With a confident stride, he approached the chief, who, despite the bewildering sight before him, had come to accept this new reality. Little did he know the true nature of the being standing in front of him. The protagonist's skin tone remained unchanged, but his hair resembled a style that had peaked in popularity during the early 2010s. Gradually, the dust began to settle, revealing a sky that darkened ominously. A massive whirlpool of clouds started to form above them. Dawn, peering out the window, sensed that something was amiss. The blue-haired president's student shared her unease, their expressions mirroring the growing tension in the air. This was anything but normal. Confusion swept through the city as bystanders gazed up at the suddenly darkened sky, a sight unlike anything they had ever witnessed before. Meanwhile, amidst the chaos of battle, the chief found himself at a loss for words. He was grappling with a far more pressing issue, one that had just arisen in the most unexpected of places. The protagonist spoke, his voice steady. He had offered this arrogant human multiple chances to settle matters peacefully, but now he sought a specific answer. Did the chief truly yearn to uncover the truth about life after death? A palpable shift had occurred in his demeanor. The blue-haired woman felt a wave of dread wash over her. She understood the urgency. They had to leave at once. The chief, despite his fear, stood his ground. In his entire life, he had never felt threatened by anyone. There was no way that some ex-bald guy would be the first to intimidate him. Steeling himself, he challenged the creature to make a move. Meanwhile, the blue-haired woman and her student pressed on in their escape. The Academy's database held no record of a zombie like this, leaving them uncertain if they were truly safe yet. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, an object whizzed past them. The intensity of the battle was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The chief's body, battered and bruised, bore testament to the chaos that had unfolded. Now, he was nothing more than a broken, overconfident shell of his former self. The ex-ball protagonist observed calmly, fully aware that this human was no longer a threat. Even in his weakened state, the chief persisted, summoning more of his robotic models. They marched into battle without hesitation, devoid of fear or emotion. Multiple explosions erupted in rapid succession. Somehow, the blue-haired woman had managed to rescue the chief, but the danger was far from over. That zombie was truly formidable, and he would need assistance to defeat it. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the blue-haired woman turned to the chief, her voice laced with frustration. "You're insane. You shouldn't have provoked him." They made the decision to split up and escape. But let's give a round of applause to the chief. He somehow managed to pull off something foolish, even in his paperoid form. The protagonist observed as the humans began to flee in panic. It was time to reveal something truly captivating. Little did the blue-haired woman know what was about to unfold. Suddenly, massive cracks began to spread across the ground, all caused by the protagonist's hand beneath her feet. An earthquake had begun, and it happened in an instant. An obstacle loomed ahead, adding to the chaos. Everything unfolding before her was surreal. With just one hand, the zombie was performing the utterly unbelievable. Even the paperoid found its escape utterly thwarted. Defying the laws of physics and common sense, half of the city was lifted into the air, resembling a colossal wall. This massive structure now loomed over the horizon. Bystanders within the city struggled to comprehend the spectacle before them. Dom realized it was as if the entire city was floating. Though she was far from the battle, it was clear that something extraordinary was unfolding. All of this was a result of the protagonist's overwhelming strength. With the human's escape completely cut off, he turned his attention back to the paperoid. Gripping its face with one hand, he dragged it to the edge of the city. With the creature firmly in his grasp, he asked, "Now do you feel threatened?" Holding the remnants of a man in his hand, the protagonist remained utterly unfazed. In the end, he confirmed what he had suspected all along. He couldn't control the mind of a robot. However, since the chief was still partly human, his brain must remain intact. He tightened his grip on the paperoid's skull. As they sent a command to the viral cells in his bloodstream, the virus began to infiltrate his brain. Suddenly, memories flooded back to him. From childhood, he had been an orphan, enduring countless bodily modifications, so many that almost nothing human remained within him. The protagonist was certain of one thing: this paperoid's life was a torment. Surviving had become more painful than death itself. As he pushed the creature over the edge of the cliff, he muttered, "Seeing those memories really ruined my mood." Fortunately, he didn't plummet to his death. The blue-haired woman intervened just in time. Having witnessed the entire harrowing encounter, she was left in shock, realizing that the zombie possessed the unsettling ability to read memories. With no options remaining, he vanished in an instant like a bolt of lightning. The following morning, he awoke in a state of panic. He realized he had once again lost control of his emotions. Transforming into that form was terrifying for him, and he had to keep reminding himself that he was a good and kind zombie. After packing his bags, he prepared to leave the human city. But just as he attempted to sneak away, Violet appeared, her voice sharp and demanding. "Where do you think you're going?" Still shaken, he felt a wave of worry wash over him. He had no intention of silencing a witness. Rushing toward her, he muttered an apology for what he was about to do, but his attack came to an abrupt halt when something caught his eye: a document. It was his official appointment as vice president. The paper was merely a formalization of the position he had already earned. Holding the paper in his hands, he stood frozen, grappling with the reality of the situation. It was hard to believe this was real. Was that truly the chief's signature? Violet confirmed it was. He quickly asked, "Did the chief say anything?" Violet replied, "The only thing he mentioned was that the vice president is an excellent human being." As she departed, she remarked, "I look forward to the day you become president. On that day, you'll finally achieve what you've set out to do." Meanwhile, in a hospital room, the paperweight was slowly regaining strength. The blue-haired woman was exasperated by his decision. After all, they now had a zombie as their vice president. Yet, for the chief, that wasn't the real issue. The creature's strength was essential for capturing Professor Jamie, but the woman couldn't shake her unease. What if the zombie lost control again? The chief, however, was unfazed. He simply asked, "Have you prepared everything?" Their singular focus was clear: to completely eradicate Professor Jamie. Meanwhile, out in the ocean, several massive warships cut through the waves, ready for action. Meanwhile, at the zombie refuge, one of the undead was rallying the masses. He proclaimed that their king had been captured by the humans, the very pillar of their support. They couldn't afford to lose him like this. Gradually, more and more zombies began to embrace the idea of retaliation. Meanwhile, some of the other leaders merely observed Varmint's reckless fervor with a mix of skepticism and amusement. They chose not to intervene. Only the king had the power to stop this. Meanwhile, the aircraft carrier pressed onward through the ocean. The chief issued a resolute order to all personnel. This was their only chance to capture Professor Jamie, no matter the cost. In an abandoned city, the protagonist walked alongside Dawn, their footsteps echoing in the silence. She marveled at the breathtaking location when, out of nowhere, a large regiment of soldiers appeared. They stood before him, saluting with unwavering discipline, eager to receive orders from their new, formidable leader, Vice President Zombie. With a united voice, they pledged their allegiance, declaring themselves the 4th Division. From this moment on, they would take orders from no one else but him. The bewildered zombie stood in stunned silence, utterly unprepared for the sheer scale of military power before him. This regiment boasted not only countless war tanks, but also a formidable force of 12,000 soldiers. Doubting their loyalty, the protagonist posed a chilling question. What would happen if he commanded the soldier to take his own life? Without a moment's hesitation, the soldier produced a grenade, asserting that the vice president's orders were absolute. It had been an honor to serve him. The zombie, in a moment of panic, urged him to stop, revealing that he had only been joking. With a sense of urgency, he hurled the grenade far away, finally allowing himself to breathe a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, a side character afflicted with protagonist syndrome wrestled with accepting the vice president's authority, convinced that he must be weak. He couldn't fathom why someone so delicate was in charge of such a crucial region. The individuals introduced themselves as members of the Academy of Stainless Steel, here to assist in capturing the target. Dawn recognized them instantly. It was President Bang and Vice President Chui. Despite their seemingly fragile appearance, they exuded an undeniable strength. Meanwhile, aboard the aircraft carrier, a samurai pondered his purpose on this mission. He couldn't fathom why he had been deployed, nor could he wrap his head around how a newcomer had risen to the rank of vice president. The blue-haired woman sharply reminded him that he was there to assist, not to question authority. It was time for him to recognize his role. Yet Gang remained perplexed, still trying to make sense of it all. Why had a rookie been assigned such a crucial role? The chief responded nonchalantly, "If you doubt him, the rookie will make you cry." Gang chuckled, convinced it was just a bluff. He was certain he was stronger than the chief. Meanwhile, within his fortress, Professor Jamie watched the enormous military mobilization unfold. The city where he was hiding had been completely encircled by enemies. He authorized the release of the zombies. With a single press of a button, a horde of the undead surged forward. Among them, a young man with glasses spotted something unusual. One of the zombies stood out from the rest. While there were many, they were no match for modern firearms. The overconfident side characters grumbled, convinced that the task was far too easy. As they neared the fallen zombies, the protagonist made a startling realization. These creatures didn't belong to his tribe. Dawn, standing beside him, feigned ignorance, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. Meanwhile, the cocky soldier sneered at the vice president, taunting him to return home where it was safe, suggesting that someone as useless as him should stick to playing video games. The remark struck a nerve, igniting irritation within the protagonist. Before he could react, a powerful zombie suddenly appeared, interrupting the moment. The protagonist's eyes widened in recognition. He had no idea what this formidable creature was doing here. Meanwhile, the young man in glasses was practically buzzing with excitement. This was his first encounter with such a powerful zombie, and he couldn't help but hope the creature would put on a spectacular show. Hours earlier, Varman had tried and failed to persuade the other zombies to join his cause. Only number 7 had decided to follow him. But his intentions were clear. He had merely come to drop off gasoline and intended to leave right after. Bound by the king's orders, he refused to disobey, but he still wished his friend good luck. Varman, undeterred, dismissed his companion as a coward. Brimming with confidence, he boldly proclaimed that he needed no one. He could eliminate the humans all on his own. But then, a peculiar scent wafted through the air, one that signaled the mad scientist to his presence. In an instant, the little creature found itself face to face with the human forces. Dawn, however, remained oblivious to the true nature of this strange being. Meanwhile, the protagonist couldn't shake his worry for his friend. Varmint, in a reckless frenzy, began drinking straight from a gasoline canister, the liquid cascading down his body as he indulged his insatiable thirst. Dawn stood frozen, utterly baffled by the scene unfolding before her. Finally, with a deafening roar, the zombie revved up his chainsaw, ready to unleash chaos and carnage. The sound was deafening, causing windows to shatter as Dawn instinctively covered her ears. Even the other soldiers struggled to shield themselves from the overwhelming noise. Yet the protagonist stood unaffected amidst the chaos. The sonic shockwave was so fierce that it sent people hurtling in every direction. With each passing moment, Dawn's fear deepened. This creature was truly a force to be reckoned with. Varmint, consumed by rage, proclaimed his intent to eradicate all humans. Among the stainless steel soldiers, one was eager for the challenge, convinced he could emerge victorious. Without a moment's hesitation, the vice president seized Dawn by the arm and began to run. Confused, she wondered why they were fleeing. Two powerful warriors stood ready to assist. With unwavering composure, the protagonist laid out the situation. The stainless steel soldiers, he declared, stood no chance of victory. Dawn felt a wave of concern wash over her at his words. The zombie, however, reassured her with a serious tone he wasn't joking. This chainsaw-wielding zombie was genuinely formidable. Then, he unveiled the truth. Varmint possessed an immortal body, and the stainless steel soldiers mocked the vice president for fleeing. But their laughter was cut short when one of their own was suddenly thrown aside, beaten senseless. The soldier was hurled with such force that he crashed through a war tank. The cocky soldier turned, bewildered to see what had just transpired. His back was now turned to his opponent, and on the other side, his subordinate lay unconscious, foaming at the mouth. It was then that he realized the truth. The zombie was right in front of him. With unsettling politeness, the creature asked, "How would you like to die?" Meanwhile, high above on the rooftop of a nearby building, the protagonist had successfully brought his allies to safety. On the avenue below, chaos reigned as destruction unfolded in every direction. The boy with glasses watched in exhilaration. This was the most formidable zombie he had ever encountered. Meanwhile, the stainless steel soldier was far from pleased with the turn of events. One moment he was on the receiving end of a brutal assault, and the next he found himself overwhelmed once more. That so-called powerful human was nothing more than a plaything in the clutches of his enemy. He plummeted to the ground like a rotten fruit falling from a tree, only to be swiftly kicked in the head as if it were a penalty kick. His body soared across the battlefield, colliding with his already unconscious subordinate. Just then, the chainsaw-wielding creature advanced, its weapon roaring with a menacing rev. In that moment, the stainless steel soldier came to a grim realization. He would never be able to wear that pair of underwear again. If it weren't for the blade on his arm, he would have faced a truly unpleasant fate. On the rooftop, the protagonist watched the battle unfold in tense silence. Dawn felt a flutter of nerves, but deep down, she was certain that soldier wouldn't last much longer. Below them, the stainless steel soldier fought valiantly, desperately trying to turn the tide of the battle. He locked eyes with the creature, a chill of terror gripping him as he cried out for his mother. This was not how he envisioned his end an utterly humiliating moment, witnessed by two onlookers who would rather forget it. Meanwhile, concealed in his laboratory, the mad scientist reveled in the torment of his subjects. The beating persisted, while the protagonist stood by, helplessly observing the unfolding horror. Regular soldiers were of no use in this situation. Their deployment would be futile. Fear gripped one of them as he turned to the vice president and asked, "What are you going to do?" Meanwhile, the protagonist was puzzled by why his own subordinate failed to recognize him. He turned to Dawn and said, "You'll be responsible for bringing that thing to its senses by any means necessary." Panic washed over Dawn at those words. She was convinced she was incapable of anything. Then, the vice president extended his hand and asked her to hold out her arm. To her shock, he bit her. Dawn screamed, stunned. It took her a moment to process what had just occurred. Panic surged through her as she feared he was about to control her mind and turn her into a puppet. But the zombie reassured her, "I'm not that kind of person. Just don't hit him too hard." Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the stainless steel soldier writhed in desperation, while the chainsaw zombie reveled in his torment. Suddenly, a voice cut through the chaos. "That doesn't look fun at all." The zombie turned, startled by the sound of mocking laughter. Dawn stepped forward, wielding a massive machine gun with newfound determination. Completely transformed, she confronted the monster with a daring challenge. "Why don't you play with me instead?" The zombie cells within her activated instantly, spreading like wildfire and rewriting her very genetic code. New nucleotide chains formed, and she evolved into something entirely different from who she once was. The chainsaw zombie stared, intrigued by the tiny girl standing before him. But that intrigue quickly turned to fury. How dare such a small, insignificant creature act so boldly? Dawn smirked, her confidence unwavering. "You're just a big, loud mouth. Honestly, there's nothing special about you." Before he could retort, she unleashed a barrage of bullets. The projectiles surged forward, yet the zombie remained still, effortlessly dodging the gunfire as if it were nothing. Meanwhile, the stainless steel soldier curled into a fetal position, desperately trying to hide. Tears streamed down his face as he prayed no one would discover the embarrassing fate of his underwear. As the battle intensified, the other stainless steel soldier seized the moment to rescue his commander. By now, Dawn had closed the distance, poised to deliver a powerful strike. Instead, she stuffed several grenades into the chainsaw zombie's mouth. "This is just dessert," she whispered with a smirk. Then, she detonated them. The explosion hurled her backward, but to her astonishment, the chainsaw zombie merely dusted himself off, unfazed. That didn't even hurt. In fact, it tickled. Before he could finish his sentence, Dawn landed a punch squarely on his face. Then another, and another. She was enjoying herself, relishing the fact that he was a resilient punching bag. Terrified, the soldier turned to the vice president and asked, "What did you do to her?" That's when he discovered the truth: her genes had been modified. Without a doubt, she could still grow even stronger. Finally, Varmint conceded, feeling the sting of pain creeping in. Meanwhile, Dawn wore an uncontrollable grin. She relished this sensation. The stainless steel soldiers were left uncertain about what was more terrifying at this moment. Without hesitation, Varmint proclaimed, "That little strength of yours isn't enough to stop me." He was suddenly caught off guard. The girl had already leaped onto his chainsaw, delivering a powerful kick to his face so forceful that it felt as if he might sprout wings. As he soared through the air, his expression betrayed the pain coursing through him. He tumbled across the ground for several meters, utterly overpowered. Upside down, he struggled to comprehend the chaos that had just unfolded. Yet, the battle raged on, leaving the avenue in ruins. The stainless steel soldiers were taken aback by the girl's unexpected strength, realizing she had been masking her true power all along. With a massive bazooka hoisted over her shoulder, she declared, "It's time for some bang bang." From his vantage point, the protagonist observed something peculiar. Varmint was lamenting his pain, yet he reached for another can of gasoline to drink. Both combatants seemed to be enjoying themselves. Meanwhile, the stainless steel soldiers were in a state of full-blown panic. Suddenly, a bazooka fired, and the projectile hurtled toward the creature. But mid-flight, the missile was suddenly sliced in half. Varmint had moved with such speed that it left the girl in shock. In the chaos, her body was torn apart, and the air became saturated with a chilling red mist. The stainless steel soldiers stood frozen in horror. To them, she was already lost. With an air of unwavering confidence, Varmint declared, "I can't be defeated. Humans are wasting their time trying." On the rooftop, the protagonist clenched his fist, a simple gesture that summoned the zombie cells to work their magic. Her body began to regenerate completely. Varmint watched in disbelief, struggling to comprehend the unfolding miracle. It was then that Dawn spoke. "I too have become undead." The stainless steel soldiers were utterly horrified as they witnessed her wounds heal completely. The battle between them felt like it would never end. Dawn, on the other hand, was reveling in the chaos, eager for more fun. The soldiers, however, were gripped by fear. They had never encountered so many crazed individuals in one place. All they could think about was finding anyone to rescue them from this nightmare. Varmint was shaken, uncertain of who the true zombie was in this battle. The vice president observed intently, while his soldiers struggled to maintain his composure. He hadn't anticipated the girl's sudden surge in power. Her body was evolving at an alarming rate, and the pain she endured was all too real. Realizing he needed to end this swiftly, he prepared to discipline his subordinate. Dawn was growing increasingly dangerous as the fight wore on. With lightning-fast agility, she closed the distance between herself and her opponent once more. Her strikes were so rapid and forceful that Varmint found himself unable to react. He was tossed across the city like a rag doll, battered from every direction in the girl's grip. He felt utterly powerless. Lying on the ground, defeated, he struggled to comprehend the creature before him, but there were no answers, only the relentless impact of his head against the pavement. In a moment of sheer desperation, he screamed, "I surrender! Please, no more!" His voice trembled as he pleaded for mercy. "I will leave immediately. Just stop!" The vice president observed the unfolding scene with a calm demeanor, while, miles away, the mad scientist watched with keen interest. Meanwhile, the girl firmly planted her machine gun into the ground, a silent declaration of her resolve. Varmint let out a sigh of relief. Finally, he had a moment to breathe. Seizing the opportunity, he launched a surprise attack, sending the girl hurtling backward into the crowd. The impact startled the bystanders and drew the ire of the vice president, who was infuriated by such reckless behavior. He couldn't believe she had fallen for his words. She should have known better than to let her guard down. Things always seemed to return to normal. At this reprimand, Dawn protested, "I didn't know that was going to happen." Varmint, assuming she had been under the influence of stimulants that had now worn off, issued a warning. Never trust the words of a zombie. Meanwhile, the mad scientist couldn't help but admire the creature's skill in launching a surprise attack. Meanwhile, the vice president was genuinely distressed, gritting his teeth with malice. The mad scientist believed he had unleashed the most powerful creature he had ever encountered. The three humans trembled in fear, their lives hanging in the balance. Suddenly, something new drew his attention. A figure had emerged on the battlefield. The two locked eyes, a silent challenge igniting between them. The mad scientist dismissed the newcomer, convinced that he posed no real threat, but Varmint recognized him instantly. The protagonist leaned in, a smirk playing on his lips. "Do you still remember who I am, little Varmint?" he asked. The tension in the street was palpable. Everyone except the protagonist was frozen in fear. The mad scientist, however, was perplexed. Why wasn't his creature moving? Varmint stood frozen, paralyzed by fear. The protagonist pressed him again. "Why did you disobey my orders?" Memories flooded back, vivid and unsettling. He recalled the day an arrogant zombie had dared to enter his territory, a creature that was neither fully human nor entirely zombie. With a weak personality like that, he would never be fit to serve as a subordinate. Dawn was completely in the dark about their conversation. Suddenly, one of the bystanders noticed something alarming. Varmint had wet himself. Gasoline dripped from his legs, forming a growing puddle on the ground. Paralyzed by fear, Varmint couldn't utter a word. With each passing moment, more gasoline continued to spill, and the mad scientist's fury was palpable. He couldn't comprehend why his creature had ceased its assault. Meanwhile, the protagonist fixed a disappointed gaze on his subordinate. Varmint stood frozen, too terrified to utter a word. He had once faced the king in a devastating defeat, leaving his former allies in shock. Now, the protagonist pressed for answers, his impatience palpable. "Why are you so quiet?" Taking advantage of the silence, he seized the moment to speak. He laid out the reasons why he should be obeyed, which only deepened Varmint's terror. The mad scientist erupted in a fit of rage, unable to comprehend why his creation was so frightened. Yet, he remained blissfully unaware of the full truth. Varmint possessed an immortal body. Once, he had been dismembered and hung from a tree for 3 centuries. Now, frustrated with the struggle, the mad scientist resorted to desperate measures to compel his creature to obey. At last, Varmint spoke. "I never forgot the orders I received." In that moment, the mad scientist's control panel exploded in a shower of sparks, and Varmint turned to flee. As he sprinted away, he shouted, "If anyone wants to fight the king, do it yourselves." The mad scientist stood there, utterly speechless. Dawn and the stainless steel soldiers shared in his astonishment. Even the protagonist had to admit that his reaction had been a bit over the top. At last, the battle against the zombies had come to an end, marking the first time the mad scientist had lost control over his creations. He had plenty more creatures at his disposal and was ready to unleash them. But just then, the professor interrupted. The main human forces were closing in on his hideout. Above the city, a helicopter hovered, poised to breach the underground lair. The woman in blue turned to the spy and asked, "Is this the place?" The spy confirmed. "Yes, it has 6 floors and covers 11,000 square meters." Not exactly encouraging news. They would need to search every inch of the hideout. The overconfident samurai declared, "Sometimes, the best way to solve a problem is with overwhelming force." With that, he leaped from the helicopter, plunging straight toward the hideout. Still aboard the aircraft, the woman in blue gear called him an irresponsible idiot. He was determined to fall faster, believing that the greater his descent, the more devastating his attack would be. Strategy was the last thing on his mind. He was solely focused on showcasing the sheer force of his power. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted in the city, its intensity obliterating a significant portion of the ground below. Now, he had access to the underground hideout. Sheathing his sword, he remarked, "This is faster than taking the elevator." The blue-haired woman scoffed, finding his display of strength utterly ridiculous. "You should use your earpiece," she warned. "You could trigger a trap." The chief corrected her with a confident smile. In the face of absolute power, there is no such thing as a successful trap. He leaped from the helicopter, leaving the 2nd Defense Unit and his remaining subordinates behind. To the blue-haired woman, they all blended together. On the ground, troops pressed forward, entering the hideout in search of any resistance. Yet, in the area they occupied, there was no one to be found. The more they searched, the clearer it became. The place was deserted. Escape was not an option. All routes were blocked. Their detection systems were so advanced that they could even catch a mosquito mid-flight. Frustration simmered in the blue-haired woman as she longed to join the action. She was far from pleased about being left behind. Her subordinate attempted to soothe her, reminding her that it was an order from their superiors. Still seething with anger, she cursed them, wishing nothing but misfortune upon their heads. Meanwhile, far away, the professor remained safe and sound. Aware that the humans had discovered his old hideout, he knew it was time to set Plan A into motion. Within a vast containment chamber lay the being he had stored, the one destined to become the zombie king. The samurai picked up a note and began to read. It was a provocation, a bold challenge to unleash the zombie king if one dared to be reckless enough. He commanded a soldier to shatter the glass, but the chiefs abruptly intervened. Their mission was to capture, not to take unnecessary risks. Realizing their initial plan had failed, the professor's team swiftly shifted to their backup strategy. A countdown commenced. With hardly any time to react, a massive explosion erupted. The soldiers fought valiantly to shield themselves from the chaos. As the smoke began to dissipate, the chief observed intently. The overconfident samurai remained unfazed by the trap laid before him. Suddenly, the mad scientist declared, "The containment chamber has been opened." A sinister smile crept across the professor's face. "At last, humanity will meet its end. Behold the dawn of a new species." He desired his creation to eradicate all life, even his own. The steel samurai stood poised, eager to witness the creature that would emerge. He never anticipated that the zombie king would take the form of a mere child. Both the chief and the steel samurai were taken aback. The chief cautioned the samurai to proceed with care. "It may appear fragile, but it harbors a deadly potential." The samurai struck first, but the creature was even quicker. The chief's eyes widened in disbelief. "It's powerful," he muttered, realizing the gravity of the situation. Without hesitation, he commanded everyone to evacuate, prioritizing the safety of his soldiers. Panic ensued as the crowd of soldiers rushed frantically toward the exit, their desperation palpable. But the steel samurai was far from satisfied with the outcome. He launched another attack, this time cleaving the creature in two literally. To his horror, each half of the zombie spawned a new one. Of all the possible outcomes, this was the worst. Now they faced not one, but two creatures. Yet, it didn't take long for them to merge back into a single formidable foe. The small zombie waited patiently, observing the movements of the humans. The mad scientist had given the order to unleash more zombies, intending to create enough chaos for their escape. True to the plan, hordes of zombies began to flood the city. Meanwhile, both the president and the blue-haired woman stood by, watching the unfolding chaos with a mix of concern and intrigue. The young officer reported that their numbers were overwhelming, and the situation was about to deteriorate further. He suggested establishing a defensive line, but his commander ordered him to hold back and simply observe. With a flick of her magnificent hair, she declared, "This is just a warm-up." Sword in hand, she prepared to unleash her fury, ready to wipe out the zombies before her. With perfect posture, her menacing aura became unmistakable. In the blink of an eye, the blue-haired woman was locked in battle. Her strikes were precise, swift, and powerful, sending zombies flying with each blow. The sheer force of her strength was astounding. She cleaves through a tree trunk, bending it under the impact. Harnessing the elastic energy, she launched herself into the air. Her subordinate watched in disbelief as she soared above the horde, effortlessly cutting down each zombie in her path. Her sword was the first to touch the ground, and she landed gracefully, perfectly balanced atop the blade. A light drizzle of zombie remains began to fall over the city, leaving the young officer utterly stunned. He had never imagined his commander possessed such incredible strength. As he glanced at the meal on his plate, a realization struck him. She was truly remarkable. If their enemies thought chaos would serve as a distraction for their escape, they would need to rethink that strategy. The mad scientist seethed with frustration. That unpredictable woman had wiped out every last zombie they had unleashed. He was convinced that if they still had the chainsaw zombie in their arsenal, things would have turned out differently. Meanwhile, more zombies were quietly infiltrating the city. Two of the protagonist's subordinates observed the unsettling movements from the shadows. They donned masks to shield themselves from the airborne agent that drove zombies into a frenzy. A man, resembling a loan shark, approached a nearby zombie, hoping to inquire about his missing colleague. However, the creature responded with a rude dismissal, telling him to get lost. Frustrated, he muttered under his breath about how unfriendly the inhabitants of this place were. Their mission was clear: find their runaway friend to avoid the wrath of the king. In the depths of the underground hideout, the so-called strongest zombie lay completely still. The humans regarded the creature with a mix of apprehension and curiosity, while the small zombie reveled in their unease, eager for them to continue their game. It felt like a challenge, and it was one that he was winning. The steel samurai stepped forward, declaring that if the little zombie still craved playtime, then he was far too soft. With his katana firmly gripped, he struck with unwavering precision. Once again, he sliced the little creature in two. A small piece bounced on the ground before seamlessly merging back into a single form. The steel samurai was growing weary of this relentless chase. He could no longer tolerate watching his enemies slip away, time and again. He commanded the little zombie to toughen up and face him in a proper fight. To everyone's surprise, the zombie complied, spitting out its pacifier. In that moment, a transformation began to unfold across its entire body. The human watched in astonishment as the zombie revealed unexpected attributes, showcasing a form unlike anything they had anticipated. It was truly remarkable how much the zombie had altered its appearance. It appeared to be gradually mastering control over its new body, leaving everyone bewildered by the possibility. With a sweet smile directed at the humans, the transformed zombie hinted that a new chapter was about to unfold. Using the allure she had just acquired, she playfully urged the men to continue their game with her. the Steel Samurai proclaimed that he would slice her into nothingness, unleashing one of his most devastating attacks. Yet, even at the height of his power, it proved futile. Her finger effortlessly halted his blade. He pressed on, but the zombies remained unfazed, showing no sign of struggle. In that moment, he understood the harsh truth. His enemy was far more formidable than he had ever anticipated. As he glanced back, he called out for the chief to join him in the battle. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the chief had already donned his most formidable armor. However, before he could make a move, a zombie lunged at him, sending him hurtling hundreds of meters away. The impact reverberated through the air, startling even the protagonist's zombie subordinates. The same sound echoed up to the presidents on the surface of the city. His body had transformed into a projectile, slamming into the rooftop of a building and triggering a massive explosion. Afterward, his form ricocheted across the city, before finally coming to rest at the feet of the vice president's subordinates. They were at a loss regarding what to do with the human. For a moment, they considered helping him, but being zombies, they ultimately chose to leave him as he was. Meanwhile, from beneath the city, smoke and debris began to rise. The woman in blue spotted another projectile soaring through the air and immediately recognized it. At the heart of the Stainless Steel Academy, the chief lay overpowered, his body barely able to move. Yet, with great effort, he managed to mumble a few words to his comrades. Soon, they found themselves confronting a dangerously formidable woman. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, a barbecue was being meticulously prepared. It was said to be the first time anyone had witnessed a barbecue being made with eggs, adding a curious twist to the familiar scene. The extras were noticeably friendlier now, and one of them had even prepared a special tea for the vice president. After taking a sip, he commented that it was lacking in sweetness. Annoyed, one of the extras demanded to know who had made the tea, insisting that only the finest should be served to the vice president. Just as they were enjoying their meal, an unsettling high-pitched sound pierced the air, leaving everyone feeling uneasy. The female zombie continued to taunt the humans, her stance shifting to one of menace. The president recognized that this creature was unlike any they had faced before and posed a significant threat. In a rare moment of unity, the rivals reached a temporary truce. It was essential that they collaborated in this critical hour. The zombie's face twisted into a deep expression of contempt, a chilling reminder of the danger they all faced. Dawn could feel the explosions reverberating from the other side of the city, each one drawing nearer. The vice president, sensing the urgency, made a decisive move. He turned to her, announcing his intention to investigate the source of the chaos. Time was of the essence. Meanwhile, the blue-bearded woman had already launched her sword at the enemy. Though it struck true, the wound was disappointingly shallow. The president was already on the creature's tail, closing in at breakneck speed. But then, her attack was intercepted. She was caught off guard by a maneuver that only a ballerina could execute with such grace. As she struggled to regain her footing, the zombie sneered, taunting her that such speed was hardly impressive. Undeterred, the president prepared to counterattack, strategically positioning herself to put her opponent at a disadvantage. Her legs arced toward the zombie's head like a scythe, and this time, she connected. The zombie smirked, taunting her about the pitiful strength behind her blow. The president stepped back, creating space for her colleague to unleash a series of slashing attacks, yet not a single strike found its mark on the creature's body. From a distance, the Steel Samurai observed the chaos unleashed by the battle among the three of them. He hoped they could fend off the creature for just a little longer. All he needed was 2 more minutes. He was on the verge of activating his emergency armor. With a sense of purpose, he began suiting up, feeling like the hero in a classic tokusatsu series. The zombie regarded him with keen interest, clearly captivated by the sight before her. To be fair, he did resemble a character straight out of a Gundam series. His imposing figure was known as Heart of Steel, and he was wielding its first version. The president, growing increasingly frustrated, noticed that the creature was completely ignoring them. Seizing the opportunity, they coordinated a combined attack against the zombie, who barely flinched in response. Ignoring women can provoke a fierce reaction, and that was precisely what the zombie had stirred. Just as they prepared to strike, she unveiled a shocking surprise, a massive tongue. It was merely a distraction, as her transformation was still underway, altering her entire form. The shockwave from the blow she delivered to the ground sent both women hurtling through the air. What was once a woman had now transformed into a figure all too familiar to Trembloni. No longer clad in the heart of steel, the samurai felt a surge of determination. The women stood in shock, realizing that the zombie was capable of transformation. Fear gripped them as they questioned their chances of winning this battle. The hulking zombie and the steel samurai, now locked in one of the most striking cosplays ever, were on a collision course, ready to clash. Standing face to face, they agreed that this battle would be resolved with a single, decisive strike. Instantly, both braced themselves to unleash their final attack. However, the zombie's strength far exceeded his own. When their blows collided, a tremendous shockwave rippled through the battlefield, leaving devastation in its wake. The women nearby were powerless to intervene. Just then, the vice president and Dawn arrived at the scene, witnessing the chaos unfold. Through the swirling smoke, a silhouette emerged. Unfortunately, the armor was more stylish than practical. The steel samurai had lost a significant part of his body. The hulking zombie taunted him, declaring his victory. Yet, the samurai, even with half his torso missing, seemed to take this as a rhetorical jab. With unwavering determination, he insisted that he was still very much in the fight. It seemed he would only concede defeat when he no longer existed. Dawn surveyed the devastation around her, questioning whether they were even in the right place. Confusion clouded her mind as she struggled to grasp the unfolding chaos. Meanwhile, the protagonist caught a whiff of a scent that felt hauntingly familiar. The creature displayed an unexpected glimmer of empathy toward the samurai, choosing to unveil her true power in the hope that he would finally relent. He certainly hadn't anticipated that the zombie could grow even stronger. Her back muscles expanded at an astonishing rate, and her hair began to rise, as if she were transforming into a Super Saiyan. To everyone's astonishment, she now resembled a typical manhwa character. Even the women were taken aback. The scientists found themselves powerless in her transformed state, but the professor calmly declared, "She is the Zombie King." This revelation was anticipated. The creature then proclaimed that there was no reason to continue the battle. Yet the samurai, driven by pride, refused to accept such an easy conclusion. The women closed in, ready to launch a coordinated attack. With a smirk, the zombie warned them that swift strikes would be futile. A mere flick of her finger was all it took. Suddenly, the armless samurai was sent hurtling through the air, and everyone was thrown back by the force. The samurai's armor shattered completely, and the impact cracked every window in the nearest building. As they were flung through the air, the women struggled to regain their composure. By a stroke of fortunate coincidence, they landed directly beside the vice president. He swiftly caught them in his arms, sparing them from further harm. Dawn's eyes widened in horror. She had never anticipated that both presidents could be taken down so easily. The steel extras were anxious about the fate of their leader. Proud and defiant, he insisted he could still fight. The zombie, grinning menacingly, remarked that he had spared their lives, yet they continued to act so stubbornly. Sensing the danger, Violet urged them to flee. "This is the Zombie King," she warned. "We need to get out of here, now." The blue-haired woman's warning echoed ominously, sending a chill of terror through Dawn. The Zombie King, with a menacing gesture, commanded his minions to attack. A horde of undead outcasts surged forward, their fury palpable. The extras were paralyzed with fear, bewildered by the sudden onslaught and helpless to stop it. Urgently, the blue-haired woman implored the vice president to order an evacuation, warning that if they stayed, that place would become their grave. The zombies surged forward, their hunger palpable. Meanwhile, the professor reveled in the overwhelming power of the Zombie King. The protagonist, feeling disrespected by the words he had just heard, dropped the two women to the ground. The blue-garbed woman looked on, taken aback by his sudden reaction. With a fierce roar, he commanded the creatures to vanish at once. That single moment was enough to completely halt their advance. The creatures circled around him, unable to disobey his command. It was as if they instinctively recognized the supreme being before them. Even the one who called himself the true Zombie King was taken aback by the unfolding scene. His curiosity piqued by this enigmatic figure. This unexpected turn of events sent the protagonist spiraling back into a whirlwind of emotions. As he strode over the zombies like they were mere stepping stones, he called out, demanding to know what title he should claim for himself, since an imposter had already taken the title of king. An eerie silence enveloped the city, and the unfortunate zombies instinctively parted, clearing a path for the protagonist. The armless samurai could hardly comprehend the scene unfolding before him. Meanwhile, as the protagonist drew closer to his enemy, he noticed an unsettling silence enveloping the scene. He took his place atop a mountain of corpses, surveying the battlefield. The creature looked up at him, confusion etched across its face. With a smirk, the protagonist coolly inquired if a cat had stolen its tongue. The armless samurai stood utterly dumbfounded by the sight before him. In stark contrast, Dom was left in shock, grappling with the gravity of the moment. This was the protagonist's true form. A subtle smirk played on the Zombie King's lips as he finally grasped the situation. His enemy was also a zombie. The armless samurai, coming to this realization, demanded to know how the Academy of the Beyond could allow a zombie to rise to the position of vice president. Without missing a beat, Violet shot back, telling him to be quiet. The tension between the two formidable beings escalated as they locked eyes, each refusing to back down. They had agreed that the one who survived this battle would be the true king. Both were poised to engage in a fierce fight. The wicked creature landed a direct blow on the protagonist, but the vice president merely scoffed, taunting him for not having eaten anything that day. It took the Zombie King a moment to grasp just how formidable his opponent truly was. He then received a devastating punch. The shockwave from the blow sent the zombies beneath them flying, their bodies lighting up the night sky. Meanwhile, the false Zombie King was only prevented from soaring away himself due to his lack of wings. His body continued to hurtle through the city, covering an astonishing distance with just that single strike. He was propelled so far that he left the continent and plummeted into the ocean. His impact was catastrophic, colliding with a battleship and throwing the entire crew into disarray. The shock wave reverberated through the vessel as the creature fought to regain its bearings. Observing the chaos unfold, the mad professor was utterly bewildered. He had no idea how this was even possible. They had never suspected that this guy was a zombie as well, despite the brutal impact of the attack. It hadn't done enough damage to finish him off. The scientists were at a loss, unable to gauge the potential of this new adversary. Meanwhile, the Zombie King began lifting the entire battleship with his bare hands. Alarm coursed through Dawn. She suddenly noticed something far more perilous descending from the sky. A submarine plummeted into the heart of the city, and the Zombie King grinned, proclaiming that he was indeed brimming with energy. The devastation around them was escalating to catastrophic levels. Trembling with fear, Dawn whispered that it would be wise to leave this place at once. Meanwhile, the lung shark-like zombie was busy repairing the steel samurai's body. His companion scolded him, insisting he stop welding at once. Reluctantly, he turned and complied. The chief, fuming with frustration, surveyed the scene. Those fools had welded parts that should have been cut and cut parts that should have been welded. As they gazed toward the horizon, an overwhelming presence loomed. The true king was approaching. Meanwhile, the battle raged on in the city. The protagonist seized the high ground, positioning himself above his adversary. With a smirk, he began to taunt him, hoping to provoke a reaction. Below, Dawn remained paralyzed with fear, still reeling from the revelation of the vice president's true form. Suddenly, a new threat loomed on the horizon, approaching with alarming speed. The protagonist deftly manipulated a cord in his hands, wrapping it tightly around the Zombie King's neck. At last, he had his enemy right where he wanted him. The armless samurai, still grappling with the reality of facing a zombie, watched in disbelief. Meanwhile, the vice president was determined not to let his foe escape. As he reeled the Zombie King in, he delivered a devastating blow. The impact was so intense that it felt as if his boot soles had been soaked in lemon juice. The force of the kick sent his enemy soaring into the stratosphere. He thought he could toy with the rope, but the moment he tried to pull it, the protagonist swiftly cut it. The creature descended from the sky like a missile, crashing into the city below. Bystanders watched in awe, as if they were spectators at a grand spectacle. Amidst the chaos, the protagonist reveled in the excitement, a grin spreading across his face. His enemy, moving with astonishing speed, launched an attack, insisting that he wasn't trying to flee. He simply wanted to shift the battlefield, and now they found themselves much closer to the ocean. The protagonist had landed on one of the aircraft carriers. Some crew members noticed his arrival, mistaking him for an ordinary person. Glancing at his opponent, he couldn't help but comment on how much he seemed to relish tossing things around. Panic swept through the crew as they came to the horrifying realization that they were facing a zombie. Some contemplated abandoning ship. Meanwhile, the false king smirked and remarked that he too enjoyed throwing things. Back in the city, the chief watched the battle unfold alongside two of the king's subordinates. "We need to flee immediately," he urged, his voice tense. He recognized the vice president's strength, but he knew better than to underestimate the mad professor. The elongated, shark-like zombie silenced the human with a sharp command, insisting he focus on the unfolding chaos. No being could hope to challenge their king. Not even a god could achieve such a feat. Just then, the protagonist, who had been aboard the aircraft carrier, vanished without a trace. In an instant, he reappeared directly in front of his adversary. The false king suddenly realized he had become faster than ever before. But before he could fully grasp his newfound speed, a brutal blow struck him squarely in the face. The force was so immense that it sent him hurtling out of Earth's orbit. As he soared through the vastness of space, it dawned on him that he was far from home. Just then, he spotted a colossal object barreling toward him, its trajectory unmistakable. A full-size ship hurtled toward him, crashing into the zombie with a thunderous impact and burying it into the moon's surface. Back on Earth, confusion reigned. No one could fathom how such a feat was possible. How could he possess such strength? Why did the laws of physics seem to have vanished? Meanwhile, the protagonist found himself sitting in a lifeboat, staring at the bizarre sight of an aircraft carrier lodged firmly on the moon. There was no escaping the danger. Wherever they went, it would follow. The furious creature roared, declaring that this was far from over. With a surge of strength, it broke free from the aircraft carrier and used the moon's gravity to launch itself back toward Earth. Meanwhile, the protagonist stood ready, waiting for it to draw closer. As he braced himself for the leap, he focused on gathering his strength. He was not just heading into the sky. He was launching himself into space. Using the aircraft carrier to build momentum, he aimed to return to Earth. The battle against the monsters raged on, relentless and fierce. Aware that the ship housed a nuclear reactor, the creature charged toward it with terrifying speed. With a deliberate strike, he aimed to showcase the ship's devastating power. Once a majestic vessel floating in Earth's orbit, it was now hurtling toward the ground. The impact unleashed a cataclysmic explosion, sending shockwaves that shattered everything in their path. Those witnessing the battle were gripped by sheer terror as chaos unfolded around them. The explosion was so colossal that its mushroom cloud was visible from various points across the planet, towering far above the clouds. As the shockwave approached, the protagonist's friends and the nearby humans frantically sought shelter. Meanwhile, he stood on another ship, poised to confront his enemy. With a powerful leap, he sent the entire vessel trembling beneath him. Now, the creature found itself once more face to face with its adversary. As the protagonist studied his adversary intently, he realized that the creature was only warming up, eager for more. After all that had transpired, a sense of unease began to settle within him. In that moment, the creature made a startling proposition. It claimed that this was a battle destined for no winners. They should cease their fighting at once. Instead, they ought to join forces to bring about the world's destruction. As he spoke, he flung the protagonist's body across the city with a casual flick. He suggested they split the world in half, each ruling their own territory while steering clear of one another. Dom couldn't shake the unease from that last attack. Meanwhile, the creature sought the protagonist's opinion. However, the protagonist had no desire to bring about the world's destruction. As the battle raged on, the chief remarked that none of this made sense. In his view, that was reason enough to flee immediately. The two combatants were far too powerful. They needed to retreat, regain their strength, and devise a counterattack. The lung, shark-like zombie silenced him with a sharp command, insisting he spoke too much nonsense. If he believed the true king was confined to a single transformation, he was sorely mistaken. The chief's expression was one of utter disbelief. With a mocking smirk, the protagonist declared that it simply wasn't worth his time to collaborate with such a creature. He was deeply offended by the very notion of dividing everything in half. The chief continued to observe the fight, captivated by the unfolding spectacle. With a menacing tone, the protagonist declared that only the weak spoke of destruction or absolute control. Dom, curious about their exchange, strained to hear, but the distance rendered their words inaudible. Meanwhile, the protagonist's fury intensified as he faced the creature before him. It seemed that this so-called king would only learn after receiving a proper lesson. The protagonist's face began to shift, color flooding back into his features. As his appearance transformed, so too did his power surge. The women watched in disbelief as the once gray-skinned figure morphed into a seemingly ordinary person. Could it be that he had transformed once more? The protagonist now bore a human appearance, albeit a rather unremarkable one. His eyes, however, were strikingly reminiscent of a certain character from a tale where names were inscribed in a notebook to seal fates. A menacing aura radiated from him, palpable even from miles away. Aboard the ship, the false king was gripped by an overwhelming sense of terror. Meanwhile, among the protagonist's subordinates, the chief was startled awake by one of them, urgently insisting he needed to see what was unfolding. They urged him to witness firsthand the entity they referred to as their god. Despite still having long nails, the protagonist had transformed back into an ordinary human. No one could fathom why he now possessed a fully human body. As the battle intensified, rain began to pour from the sky, amplifying the tension. The false king's frustration mounted. He simply couldn't grasp the nature of the being before him. How could someone be both a zombie and a human at once? Just as his attack was poised to strike the face of this enigmatic entity, the air crackled with anticipation. The protagonist remained still until, in a surreal moment, even the raindrops froze mid-fall. All it took was the simple lift of his hand. In an instant, the so-called zombie king's body ascended into the air. As if obeying a command from above, the raindrops began to move again, but this time in reverse, soaring back toward the sky. The people around him were also swept up in this strange gravitational pull. Dawn desperately grasped for something to anchor himself, questioning whether a zombie should wield such immense power. Even the massive warships were not spared from this overwhelming force. Sea creatures began to rise from the depths of the ocean, creating a terrifying spectacle. Among them, a once mighty creature, now subdued, glared defiantly at its opponent. As the protagonist approached, he declared with a smirk, "From now on, you should call me Daddy." Even from the vastness of space, the cataclysm was visible, a harbinger of chaos taking shape. Darn finally grasped the magnitude of the situation. It was a colossal tornado. The presidents tumbled to the ground, and the fish that had been hurled into the air began to rain back down. Shaking off the shock, Violet declared, "No zombie should have the power to do all this." Just then, a gigantic whale crashed onto the rooftop of a nearby building. Everything was so absurd that even the mad professor was left speechless. In his paperweight-like state, the false zombie king was utterly bewildered by the unfolding events. The mad scientists, too, had never witnessed anything like this in their entire lives. Without arms, the creature struggled to rise, taking the most challenging path imaginable. Yet, thanks to his remarkable regenerative abilities, his arms began to regrow. He declared that everything being done to him was utterly futile. After all, he couldn't be killed. Even if he were sliced into thousands of tiny pieces, he could still regenerate. The protagonist took that statement as a personal challenge. With a swift motion, he yanked the creature's body toward him, seizing it by the throat with one hand. The creature thrashed in desperation, but the protagonist merely smiled. "You completely misunderstood the concept of death," he said. "You don't need to destroy a body to make someone experience it." As his grip tightened, the creature's senses began to fade, leaving only the deep, piercing gaze of the protagonist in his line of sight. The heavy atmosphere surrounding the massive vessels drifted through space, their designs clearly meant for interstellar travel. Meanwhile, tornadoes tore across the vast ocean below. In that moment, the false king understood the truth. This being was far more ancient than he had ever imagined. It was a remnant from a time long forgotten, a relic from an era that stretched back beyond his wildest dreams. A great war raged on, and the formidable structures stood poised for battle. They had already endured over 1,000 sieges, and this marked the 6th time humanity had faced annihilation. Yet, the protagonist's strength was unstoppable. The spacecraft, once symbols of power, crumbled before him, reduced to mere debris. To him, they were nothing but fleeting shadows. As the creature accessed these memories, it began to unravel, teetering on the brink of madness. In its final moment of clarity, all it could perceive were dark, abyssal eyes staring back at it. Its body lay completely still, and the expression on its face suggested that its consciousness had vanished. Still cradling the lifeless form in his hand, the babble seemed to finally reach a haunting conclusion. Those who witnessed the scene were left in utter confusion. The protagonist nonchalantly released the zombie, watching as its body fell to the ground. When it landed, it lay completely still, revealing itself to be nothing more than an empty shell. The chief, intrigued, couldn't comprehend why the creature had suddenly stopped moving. The lung shark let out a chuckle, remarking that it must have literally died of fear. The chief, taken aback, couldn't fathom that such a thing was even possible. Meanwhile, the mad scientist and his team were equally incredulous. This outcome defied all logic. It was time for them to make their way to the helicopter. The entire fleet along the coast had been obliterated. This was their only chance to escape. It was now or never. The mad scientist tried to flee, but froze in shock as he realized the truth. The most powerful being of all stood right beside them, a presence they had never anticipated. There was no way he should have found them. With a gaze that was both ordinary and terrifying, the protagonist remained silent, leaving the tension hanging in the air. He watched as those around him trembled in fear, curious to see whether they would surrender willingly or choose to meet the same fate as the zombie king. They had just a moment to decide. Instantly, everyone chose to submit. Everyone, that is, except for the mad professor, who stubbornly continued to resist. The protagonist turned his gaze toward him, a serious expression settling on his face. Dressed as he was, the man who should have faced execution was captured alive. The others remained oblivious to the change in him. He was behaving strangely. When he returned to his usual self, he confessed that his transformation had been terrifying, yet he preferred to embrace kindness and gentleness. Violet encouraged Dawn to confront him about it, but even she felt a twinge of fear toward the vice president. Violet encouraged her, playfully suggesting that one day they might even make her the vice president of the zombies. Nervous yet determined, Dawn approached him and asked if he was okay, since they were about to leave. He stood up, declaring he was hungry. The sudden movement startled her and she nearly jumped back. But in that moment, what he really wanted was simply a more durable shirt. With that, she noticed he had returned to his usual calm demeanor. She asked if he remembered anything, and he replied that he did, though his memories were somewhat hazy. He had lost track of time, but was certain he had encountered many zombies like the one before them. However, since they were all too weak, he never felt the need to remember each of those encounters. Inside the prison transport vehicle, the mad scientist leaned closer, eager to uncover the professor's thoughts. The professor smiled knowingly. He had never anticipated the existence of such a formidable being, but he was confident that he would soon acquire a sample of its genes, allowing him to create an even more powerful entity. With the zombie king defeated, Professor Jamie was finally in custody, but his ambitions were far from extinguished. With that, the protagonist found himself thrust into the spotlight. The public began to rally for him to become president. Eager for his leadership, he would need to manage and protect his cities. Knowing that failure to expand the population could cost him his title, he chose City Edge, despite its complete abandonment. This decision raised concerns among his superiors, who feared he would lose his position before long. The protagonist remained resolute, his determination to govern unwavering. Once the formalities were completed, he was officially declared president. However, not everyone was pleased. A supervisor seethed with anger over his choice of a deserted city and an inexperienced leader to oversee it. Even Violet acknowledged the risks involved in such a decision. Despite the concerns, the protagonist's subordinates began their relocation to the new city, ready to embrace the challenge ahead. The scene was nothing short of extraordinary. Human soldiers were actively assisting zombies in relocating to their new home. Standing alongside the new president were his elite subordinates, ready to ensure everything went smoothly. The lung shark confirmed that all tasks had been executed as ordered. Every citizen had been successfully transferred. This was precisely what he had envisioned. As the soldiers lined up in formation, a tiny zombie flinched, still unaccustomed to the idea that humans might see them as a threat. One soldier leaned down, offering reassurance. "The president's orders are like the commands of a god," he said. "And the president's people are your people too." The little zombie struggled to grasp the weight of those words. Yet, after so long, they finally had a place to call home. Sometimes, for a race to thrive, war isn't the answer. The protagonist, not only powerful but also remarkably wise, contemplated the fate of Varmint, who had been left hanging as punishment for several months. After careful consideration, the protagonist decided that Varmint should remain in his place of punishment, suspended atop the Sea Hall building. At the rooftop, he was securely restrained, tears streaming down his face as he admitted his wrongdoings. Desperately pleading for mercy, he promised to be obedient from that moment on, terrified of becoming zombie jerky. Meanwhile, the citizens rejoiced at their newfound stability, finally feeling at home. In the midst of it all, Violet trained relentlessly, her determination to grow stronger, burning brighter than ever. But then she crashed violently into a wall. Struggling to recover from the jarring impact, she pushed herself back to her feet, coughing heavily. Confusion washed over her. How could this even be happening? Across the battlefield stood Dawn, radiating an overwhelming surge of power. Witnessing this transformation firsthand, Violet understood with a sinking heart that she was utterly outmatched. This was power that transcended all limits. It felt as though Dawn possessed two entirely different personalities. As Violet observed her intently, the smile on Dawn's face revealed a striking transformation in her demeanor. With newfound confidence, Dawn proclaimed that she was still ready to fight. Inspired to elevate her own abilities, Violet propelled herself forward with astonishing speed. She deftly maneuvered to get behind her friend, but was abruptly caught off guard by Dawn's unnaturally jerky head movement, something no ordinary human would do. This bizarre sight startled the president, causing her to abort her attack. "Are you even human anymore?" she questioned, but the shock of the moment made her push that thought aside for now. As they continued their sparring match, Dawn unleashed a fierce assault. Violet swiftly shifted to evasive maneuvers, deftly dodging the hail of gunfire. Dawn's machine gun blared like a live broadcast, each shot echoing with intensity. With a triumphant grin, she declared that she was now strong enough to become president herself. Her laughter took on a sadistic edge, the relentless roar of her weapon amplifying the thrill of the moment. After evading her pursuers for what felt like an eternity, Violet finally found a moment of cover. Yet, it was evident that she was nearing her breaking point. Her frustration was only eclipsed by the anger she harbored toward herself. With renewed determination, she called out to Dawn, demanding to see her strongest technique immediately. This command awakened the dormant zombie cells within Dawn's body, unleashing their full power. Seizing the opportunity, Violet charged forward, unleashing one of her most formidable attacks. Dawn mocked her opponent, taunting her with the question of whether she was even trying. "I wouldn't waste my best technique on someone so weak," she sneered. But then, in a shocking twist, the president struck with deadly precision. A clean cut severed Dawn's body in two. Yet, despite the pain and devastation, she simply smiled. Violet, stunned, couldn't help but ask, "Why didn't you even try to dodge?" Violet was utterly shaken by the sheer power of Dawn's insane regeneration ability. It was as if Dawn's genes had become practically invisible. Overwhelmed, Violet demanded to know what the zombie had done to her. In a moment of vulnerability, Dawn almost revealed her own genes, asking if Violet finally understood that she, too, could aspire to be a president. With a swift motion, she lunged at Violet, hands poised to deliver a precise strike. This time, Violet couldn't evade the attack. She was slammed against the wall, and that was the last straw. "Let's call it a day," she suggested, her voice strained. As Dawn's body began to emit white smoke, she transformed back to her normal self. "I'm so sorry," she said, her eyes wide with regret. "I didn't mean for any of that to happen." Violet, still catching her breath, couldn't help but ask, "So you really aren't a zombie, even after being bitten?" Dawn revealed that she had undergone numerous tests in the lab, all confirming that she was still human. Yet, this did little to clarify her extraordinary regeneration abilities, or the peculiar way she moved her head. She sensed that she could transform at will, feeling no physical changes within herself. Even when exhaustion set in, she could take stimulants without experiencing any side effects. Violet's expression shifted to one of pure frustration. "Move out of my way, Dawn," she insisted. "I have something important to do." Dawn inquired about her destination, but Violet snapped back. "That's none of your business." Another subordinate chimed in, asking where she was headed. Ignoring them both, Violet hurried towards City Edge, the territory of the protagonist. She hurriedly boarded the plane, which took off, soaring directly toward the city. At last, the aircraft landed at the airport. The president rushed off, her panic evident as she completely disregarded her subordinate. Meanwhile, outside the city hall, life continued as normal. The protagonist was busy assigning various districts to his team. At last, the moment had come to assign a role to the man who resembled a lone shark. Eager to serve, he exuded a mix of loyalty and recklessness. It was fitting, really, given his appearance. The protagonist recognized his potential and decided to place him in charge of the city's treasury, entrusting him with the management of all its finances. Just then, the door to the meeting room swung open dramatically. Upon recognizing Violet, the protagonist inquired about her unexpected arrival. She rushed toward him, and the timing couldn't have been better. He had intended to report the city's situation to her. However, in a surprising turn, Violet abruptly covered his mouth, causing him to inadvertently bite her arm. With a mix of gratitude and urgency, she thanked him for his actions, declaring that he could do whatever he wished with the city. As she stepped outside, making her way back to her own city, she unexpectedly encountered her subordinate near the entrance of City Hall. His expression was laced with concern, particularly about the bite she had received. He feared that she might now fall under its control. If she ever chose to betray humanity, the consequences would be dire. Yet the allure of such power, strength, and regeneration was undeniably tempting. It was a risk worth taking. She didn't mind dancing for him if it meant achieving her goals. Meanwhile, in the meeting room, the protagonist was grappling with the events that had just unfolded. After assigning roles to his subordinates, the city began to thrive. A clothing store for zombies opened its doors, and barbers set up shop, transforming the once desolate streets into a bustling hub of activity. Janitors and furniture brokers were scattered throughout the city, and a driving school had even been set up to teach zombies how to operate vehicles, an unusual endeavor, considering their lack of experience. At City Hall, he observed the city's progress with a profound sense of fulfillment. Meanwhile, his file was under review by the supervisor, adding a layer of anticipation to his day. She was far from impressed by the new president's credentials. It baffled her why the Academy of the Beyond had chosen him. Soon, however, she discovered that he was rumored to be a zombie, at least. That was the claim made by the president of the Academy of Stainless Steel. She dismissed it as mere slander, knowing all too well that rival academies often indulged in spreading false rumors about one another. Despite her reservation, she found herself disliking the new president. She questioned whether he possessed the right temperament for the role. Zombie or not, she was determined to see for herself. Meanwhile, at the North Pole, an expedition was in full swing. A helicopter was making its descent toward the landing site, while a colossal ship was forging its way through the ice-laden sea. A man approached Professor Strange with exciting news. They had uncovered the remains of an ancient civilization, a desiccated body that had lain frozen for thousands of years. This remarkable find emerged during their recent experiments, buried deep beneath 500 meters of ice. The professors emphasized the need for caution. They couldn't risk damaging such a significant discovery. If this truly belonged to an ancient civilization, it would mark one of the greatest discoveries in human history. Slowly, the ice block was being meticulously extracted, each movement filled with anticipation. The professor hoped this would lead to a significant breakthrough in technological advancements. Yet, among the gathered crowd, a few suspicious figures lurked beneath their hoods, their intentions unclear. As the president of the Department of Archaeology, he had never felt this level of anxiety about his work before. The crane finally lifted the massive block of ice, carefully lowering it to the ground. Inside, a human silhouette emerged, a distinctly female figure. Though her form was severely dried, an undeniable potential radiated from her. The professor stared in disbelief, utterly mesmerized by the sight before him. Distracted, one of the team members was suddenly attacked, a vicious bite to the neck. As he struggled, the man beside him shouted, demanding to know who was responsible for the assault. The professor's heart sank as he realized these attackers were not part of his team. Panic erupted among them. They screamed for help, but their cries echoed into a void, leaving them feeling utterly helpless. One of the mysterious figures hurled the professor to the ground, declaring him nothing more than a necessary sacrifice. "Stop struggling," they commanded, their voices cold and unyielding. "We only need a taste of your life essence." With unnaturally long canines glinting in the dim light, they reveled in the thought of biting into flesh. Meanwhile, a block of ice shattered against the ground, echoing the tension in the air. Without hesitation, one of the men began to smash open the icy enclosure. It didn't take long before they uncovered the dried-up body within. She was nearly free from her frozen prison. Once liberated, they draped a coat over her. After all this time, she was finally free. Her subordinates stood at attention, saluting her as they hailed the Blood Queen. They wished her a long life and eternal youth. Her first question was straightforward. "Is that cursed zombie still alive?" The Blood Queen turned her gaze toward the horizon. Her subordinates confirmed that the zombie had indeed survived, even after a millennium. Strangely, after decimating human civilization, he had chosen to ally with them and was now focused on rebuilding his clan. One of the women urged the queen to tread carefully. Yet, beneath her words lay a deep-seated hatred and resentment. She was resolute in her determination not to be bested by him again. Meanwhile, at the headquarters, everything seemed to be running smoothly. The zombies were savoring their leisurely lives, sipping on delightful tea, when one of them received news of a visitor's arrival. Curiosity piqued. All those intrigued by the new president had gathered at the headquarters. The man who had been bitten earlier writhed in agony, a sight unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed. This was no ordinary zombie bite. They all knew he had been part of the archaeological expedition, and now his team was missing. Despite being just an ordinary individual, he had somehow managed to injure 2 presidents. It was clear they needed a professional opinion on this bizarre situation. A heavily armored vehicle came to a halt in front of the building. Inside, the protagonist sat, still adjusting to the sight of soldiers saluting him with precision. It was a strange feeling, one he hadn't quite grown accustomed to yet. As he stepped out, he was escorted into the building to examine the case at hand. Several well-drawn side characters awaited him, their expressions a mix of anticipation and respect. The first among them stepped forward, ready to extend a warm welcome. The president of the Academy of Iron was thrilled to meet the man who had captured the notorious mad scientist. After exchanging greetings, he continued on his way, leaving behind a wave of excitement. However, a certain side character couldn't help but feel envious, dismissing the protagonist as just another nobody. Meanwhile, a zombie, oddly delighted, eagerly shook hands with the humans. In contrast, another foolish character scoffed, confidently declaring that he could tell just by looking that the protagonist was weak. Meanwhile, the Iron Samurai couldn't help but wonder if these side characters were courting disaster. Just as he made this observation, he suddenly noticed that the Iron Samurai had vanished. With a surge of instinct, he wisely chose to hide. He certainly hadn't anticipated the approach of a zombie. The doctor, puzzled, inquired about the creature, but the zombie seemed barely aware of its own age. How was he supposed to know what kind of creature it was? Yet, he couldn't help but notice the peculiar markings on the man's neck. Suddenly, a distant memory stirred within him. Feeling a bit anxious, Violet asked if he had come to a realization. The man's demeanor grew increasingly aggressive, and it was then that he finally understood who he was truly dealing with. The first rule of being a scoundrel is to be clever. It guarantees survival. The protagonist felt a surge of excitement at this revelation. He recognized that the man before him was a member of the Blood Tribe. A tremendous energy pulsed from his hand, so potent that it sent shockwaves rippling through the room. The once aggressive vampire immediately curled into a fetal position, trembling in fear. The humans were sent sprawling across the room, and even the hapless side character was not spared. No one could pinpoint the cause of the sudden explosion. Something was unfolding. Meanwhile, the girls had grown accustomed to such chaos. As they stared at the creature, the protagonist felt a chilling certainty. He had thought he had wiped this menace off the face of the earth long ago, but he quickly realized he had been mistaken. He needed to find that little girl who took such delight in poisoning him. The vampire, however, insisted he knew nothing. He had only been in this form for a day and was pleading for mercy. At last, the zombie's energy began to stabilize. The other presidents were starting to reconsider their initial impressions of the zombie. Meanwhile, the Iron Samurai found himself regretting his decision to leave home. The worst of the tension had subsided, and the zombie had truly returned to normal. The girls approached him, eager to learn if he had uncovered any new information. They were particularly curious about the Blood Tribe. With a deadly, serious expression, the protagonist warned them to exercise extra caution in the days ahead, as if he was on the verge of revealing something crucial. The girls steeled themselves for a revelation that could alter their lives forever. But just when the moment arrived, the protagonist sheepishly admitted he had forgotten what he was about to say. Violet's frustration boiled over at the unnecessary tension. She couldn't help but think that every time he transformed, his mind seemed to weaken. He attempted to defend himself, insisting that the memory would come back to him soon. Meanwhile, the other presidents exchanged glances, now convinced that he truly was lacking in strength. Upon hearing this, the protagonist cast a sideways glance at them, nearly causing them to embarrass themselves. Meanwhile, in an abandoned city, the vampires were proudly presenting their new home to the Blood Queen. As she surveyed their surroundings, her expression turned to one of utter disgust. Their living conditions were so dire that they were reduced to receiving alms without even having to ask. Passers-by couldn't comprehend why beggars lingered on these streets. After all, the government-managed cities were well-kept and thriving. One of the queen's subordinates spotted a meager sum of money and felt a surge of joy, which only fueled her anger further. She couldn't grasp why she had been brought back to life, especially in such a precarious situation. The girl lamented that the last millennium had been a relentless struggle for survival. Ever since the zombie had turned her into a mere shadow of her former self, all they could do was observe from a distance. Following that, he began his campaign to exterminate vampires. They had to do whatever it took to endure. To evade the zombie, they feigned death, hiding in the shadows. For 1,000 years, his presence had forced them into hiding. No matter where they found themselves in the world, they remained hidden from both humans and zombies. They had lived this way for so long that her friend had become a complete fool. The queen had declared that reviving her had been a futile effort. Back then, she was no match for him, and now the odds were even less favorable. Just then, the fool finally spoke up, claiming they had revived her because they had acquired a vital piece of information. They had heard whispers of someone who could grant her invincibility. The girl confirmed the rumors were true, piquing the queen's interest. She demanded to know the identity of this mysterious figure. "It's that man," the idiot replied, presenting a photo of the mad professor. Meanwhile, inside the headquarters, the humans were still assembled, having ventured to meet the mad professor, who remained securely restrained. To the zombie, it would be preferable if the prisoner were no longer alive. However, Violet insisted they needed to learn more about his hidden experiments. Besides, the professor still had numerous spies at his disposal. The protagonist pointed out that the professor could easily find a way to escape from this prison. A poorly informed side character scoffed, dismissing the notion as impossible, claiming the professor was under extremely tight security. Since it was the zombie who had captured him, they decided to give him a tour of the facility designed specifically to contain him. This prison was an impressive fortress, situated 3 kilometers underground, with a staggering 1,500 foreseen, 100,000 armed guards patrolling its depths. Even with an elevator, it took a full half-hour to reach the lowest level. And that was just the beginning. An extensive array of weaponry was strategically positioned throughout the facility, ready for any eventuality. But that was just the beginning. Every 100 floors had its own president, totaling 30 in all. On top of that, 2 exclusive warden presidents oversaw the entire prison. With such an impenetrable security system, an escape seemed utterly impossible. As if that weren't enough, a massive bomb was installed within the facility, and the professor was physically tethered to the detonator. Even if he were freed, the explosion would obliterate him completely. Not even a god could survive such a cataclysm. The protagonist couldn't help but feel a twinge of admiration for the sheer scale of it all. Yet beneath that, he found humanity's paranoia somewhat amusing, almost embarrassing, really. Their fears seemed utterly ridiculous to him. In a shadowy alley adjacent to the prison, the Blood Queen observed the facility with a mixture of intrigue and dismay. "Humans are such hateful creatures," she muttered, taken aback by the intense security measures in place. Meanwhile, a side character approached the president with urgent news. "An inspector is on their way to the protagonist's city," they warned. "You should inform your boyfriend." She quickly denied any claims of them dating, bewildered by the suggestion. Meanwhile, the inspector had just been informed that the city was overrun with zombies. Yet, the side character remained unfazed. To him, only one thing mattered: absolute strength. The president, upon hearing this, wore a curious expression, as if pondering the implications of such a mindset. She understood that this fool would soon discover the harsh realities of their world. The city was impressively organized, a testament to human resilience. The zombie marveled at how prosperous human cities had become. Meanwhile, the mad professor languished in his unbreakable prison. Inside, a man approached, carrying food for the professor. One of the scientists, however, had already lost hope, believing that their situation was beyond redemption. The professor remained fixated on acquiring the zombie's genes, a pursuit that sent shivers down his subordinate's spine. Fear gripped him. He was certain they would soon face execution. Yet the professor exuded an unsettling confidence. As long as the humans remained unaware of his research, he believed his position was secure. He had even instructed his spies to stash away all critical data in a location known only to them, ensuring that his secrets would remain hidden. He was resolute in his desire to make these fools regret sparing his life. The zombie was far too formidable for them to extract a genetic sample, and it seemed unlikely they could ever create anything stronger than him. Yet to the professor, that was irrelevant. What he truly needed was a test subject that was already powerful. That would simplify his work considerably. However, there was one problem. This was a maximum security prison. The scientists were at a loss for how they would escape. The professor fell silent, already aware of what was about to unfold. A food delivery robot was making its way toward them, small and moving at a snail's pace. Its overly cautious movements felt almost suspicious. Even the robot appeared hesitant, its movements faltering. Observing the unfolding scene, the mad scientist was left utterly bewildered. Meanwhile, the professor nonchalantly took a bite of his food, seemingly unfazed. Unbeknownst to others, a tiny probe was cleverly concealed in one of his teeth, allowing him to secretly communicate with the spy. He was eager to discover the whereabouts of the zombie king's body. He discovered that it was being kept in a laboratory on the 200th floor of the prison, which itself had 100 floors and was guarded by 2 wardens. The body lay completely unresponsive. The professor instructed his spy to keep following his orders. Meanwhile, in the city, a zombie ambled cheerfully through the streets when his phone rang. It was Violet. She informed him that an inspector was on her way to his city and would be arriving any moment. The auditor's task was to assess the citizens' quality of life and lifestyle. If she discovered he was a zombie, he would be fired on the spot. Overwhelmed with anxiety, he asked if she would believe him if he simply claimed to be human. Violet scolded him, reminding him that his entire city was teeming with zombies. She urged him to take immediate action. After hanging up, dread washed over him. He feared that it was already too late. Unsure of what to do or what was even within his control, he felt utterly lost. Then, as he glanced into his shop window, something caught his eye: an array of makeup supplies, just waiting for inspiration. The inspector has arrived. Touching down at the airport, she quickly boarded a plane that was ready to whisk her away to the city. Her primary concern? The weak character of the new president, which only fueled her eagerness to dismiss him. Meanwhile, in the city, the president was caught off guard as several vehicles unexpectedly plummeted from the sky. This unusual sight was the handiwork of the protagonist. His subordinates watched with curiosity as trucks filled to the brim with makeup rolled in. The plan was to disguise the citizens, as an inspector was en route. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, the loan shark quickly began organizing teams to ensure the task was completed on time. This was essential for their survival in the city. Trucks loaded with makeup were swiftly dispatched to various districts. Some zombies were doubtful about the effectiveness of this strategy, but the loan shark never questioned his king's orders. He believed there had to be a purpose behind this apparent madness. Without hesitation, all the zombies sprang into action. A young gum child curiously asked what was happening. His mother explained that the king had requested they disguise themselves as humans. With a smile, she approached a distribution point and picked up some makeup. Her son's eyes sparkled with excitement at the prospect of the task ahead. After asking him to wait just a moment, she transformed completely, initiating a citywide makeover. At last, the makeup was fully distributed. However, some zombies found themselves struggling with their disguises. They couldn't help but point out that Goo's costume was far from convincing. In response, the other zombies shot back, insisting it wasn't their concern. Clearly, these two particular cases were bound to cause trouble. The solution? They transformed them into dogs. Meanwhile, the inspectors were expected to arrive any moment now. The two zombies were less than thrilled with their new dog disguises. However, the lone shark reminded them that in their previous lives, they had indeed been just that, dogs. It was all part of the inspector's clever ruse. At last, the inspector's plane touched down. But unbeknownst to the zombies, she had actually made her way into the city by train instead. She intentionally bypassed her official transport, convinced that her travel details had been compromised. By arriving incognito, she could investigate more effectively. There was a palpable bias against the new president. One of the side characters couldn't help but ask why she harbored such disdain for him. She scoffed, believing him to be weak and unqualified. After all, very few people ever managed to impress her. In this instance, her bias against him was already evident. Overhearing their conversation, she questioned what was wrong with forming an opinion ahead of time. Ever since the High Superintendent had relinquished his authority, she felt that any random fool could rise to the presidency. In her eyes, only the superintendent had the vision and capability to guide humanity toward a prosperous and glorious future. Back in the city, the protagonist savored his meal of eggs. But with the inspector's arrival, it was time to shift gears. As they delved into their discussion, a side character remarked on how long it had been since they last saw the High Superintendent, who had embarked on an expedition and was expected to return soon. Meanwhile, at the airport, the city's team anxiously awaited the inspector's arrival. As they began to grow suspicious of her delay, they chose to wait a little longer. The first inspections commenced. Two of the inspector's assistants made their way to a store to kick off the evaluation process. It was there that they stumbled upon something peculiar. Every single product on the shelves was made from eggs. This unsettling discovery deeply disturbed one of the assistants. He declared that he couldn't even bear to look at or hear about eggs, which puzzled the inspector, considering the man was both blind and deaf. As the inspector continued interviewing the townsfolk, another assistant questioned a citizen about the Zombie King's administration. When asked if he had ever had any complaints, the citizen replied enthusiastically that the king was simply wonderful. He offers free houses and eggs. During the interview, however, the unexpected happened. The citizen's arm suddenly detached. The inspector was taken aback, panic rising within him as he worried for the man's well-being. But the citizen simply picked up his arm and strolled away, casually explaining that it was merely a prosthetic. "No need to worry," he added with a nonchalant grin. Despite their best efforts, the assistant found themselves utterly bewildered. There wasn't a single rational person to be found in the entire city. This was the first time the inspector had encountered such absurdity among humanity. It felt as if she had stumbled into a realm of the undead. She began to suspect that the Zombie King had constructed a city exclusively for oddballs and lunatics. It was a perilous feast for the senses. Meanwhile, the Zombie King gazed intently at something atop a distant building. One of his soldiers sensed that something was amiss. Concerned, another subordinate inquired about the issue. The soldier explained that the king had been acting oddly ever since his last meal, mumbling to himself and trembling. His assistant, sensing the gravity of the situation, asked if there was anything unusual about the food he had consumed. The soldier was uncertain. All he knew was that the president was hungry, so they decided to prepare some spicy scrambled eggs for him. That turned out to be a grave mistake. The king absolutely could not tolerate such food. Puzzled, the soldier asked why. It was then that he learned the chilling truth. Spicy food unleashed the king's uncontrollable mode, and once activated, he would remain in that state for at least a month. Spreading the grim news was urgent. He quickly called Blackie to explain the situation. Initially, Blackie was baffled. After all, they had already banned all spicy food from the city. How could this have happened? Unfortunately, the lone shark was just as in the dark. Tension hung thick in the air, leaving everyone on edge. The man resembling Piccolo speculated that the king might eliminate the inspection team. Honestly, it was a genuine concern. With little left to explore at their current location, the team resolved to press on. Just then, they spotted an unusual object in the sky, a truck. The truck crashed nearby, sending debris scattering in all directions. Moments later, the zombie king himself made his entrance, leaving the inspectors bewildered. They had been assured there wouldn't be a truck in the area. Yet, standing before them, the president appeared almost giddy. He announced that he would personally guide the inspector on a tour of his city. The inspection team struggled to regain their composure after the shockwave. They were bewildered, unsure of what had just transpired. Even more troubling was the identity of the man before them, a figure radiating an oppressive aura. The zombie king's gaze fixed on the inspector, his eyes piercing through the chaos. An overwhelming pressure emanated from him, leaving the team on edge. An overwhelming sense of fear washed over her. She didn't recognize the man before her, and that disappointment was palpable. He voiced his frustration, lamenting that she had forgotten him. After all, he was the zombie she had been desperately searching for. The revelation sent a chill down her spine. This was not the image she had held in her mind. In fact, she could have sworn he hadn't looked like this at all. He explained that the only difference was that he had simply removed his mask. As he stepped closer, she instinctively took a step back. It was a generous gesture. After all, she had traveled a long way. He had prepared a special gift for her, the best spicy eggs she would ever taste. Dozens of his citizens were already on hand, ready to serve the meal. The protagonist offered her a comforting smile, urging her not to worry. "We don't need anyone else," he assured her. Then, without warning, he seized her by the collar and lifted her off the ground. The city school district held little appeal, so he decided to take her somewhere far more intriguing. With a terrifying leap, he soared through the air, the inspector in tow, defying gravity with a breathtaking jump. Her entire body was frozen in fear, leaving her assistants to watch helplessly, unsure of how to respond. Meanwhile, his subordinates recognized the urgency of the situation. They knew they had to act quickly. The grand tour was about to begin. They descended toward the ground at a perilous speed. The protagonist landed on the rooftop of a building, shattering the floor beneath him upon impact. Still gripping the inspector, he urged her to take a closer look. "This is my city," he declared, a hint of pride in his voice, "and we're already beginning to expand it." All around them, a diverse array of professionals bustled about: white-collar workers, cleaning crews, and business operators, each diligently contributing to the city's growth. He was poised to explain the city's laws and regulations, but the inspector remained frozen in fear, unable to process the scene unfolding before her. Since she remained motionless, he continued to drag her through the streets. Law and Order, Zombie Edition. He noted how everyone adhered to traffic laws. There were no infractions in sight. Suddenly, a truck driver panicked, his legs the only visible part of him, as if the rest of his body had vanished. The Zombie King calmly explained how lawbreakers were dealt with in this new world. They were launched into the sky. To illustrate his point, he sent the truck soaring into the air. Despite lacking wings, it shot upward like a rocket. The inspection team, on the verge of hailing a taxi, turned just in time to witness the chaos. Their eyes widened as they spotted the truck embedded in one of the city's buildings. Blackie acted swiftly to save the driver's life. The inspector believed the driver had been executed, but the Zombie King confidently refuted this claim. "That's impossible," he declared. "My subordinates possess unparalleled power." Just then, an interruption occurred as the inspector's assistants arrived to lend their support. The protagonist casually tossed her in their direction. Although the driver had been rescued, a bus remained lodged in the building. Once again, the protagonist warned them that if they believed they had lived long enough, all they had to do was stand in his way. After that brief warning, fear took hold, and all they could do was flee. Silence enveloped the intersection, heavy and palpable. One of the assistants urged the chief inspector to leave quickly, noting that his legs were already growing weak. They couldn't fathom how a person could endure such a display. There was clearly something off about that president. Compared to the strongest individuals they knew, he seemed almost inhuman. As they lingered, the protagonist continued to observe them intently, curiosity etched on their face. One thing was now clear. The person who had labeled them weak needed to be dismissed without delay. Just as they were about to leave, the chief inspector unexpectedly asked to stay a bit longer. She acknowledged that he was doing an excellent job managing the city, but emphasized that the president needed more than just administrative skills. He had to possess at least a respectable level of combat prowess. The protagonist's subordinates were engulfed in despair. Her words felt like a direct challenge. She claimed she hadn't witnessed the full extent of his power and questioned whether he could truly protect the entire city. Panic surged among the subordinates as they swiftly restrained her, gripped by fear of what might unfold next. Now, genuine concern washed over them. Had he overheard their words? The zombie paused in his departure, falling silent for a long moment, intrigued by the woman's statement. He seemed to weigh her challenge carefully. If she truly wanted to witness everything he was capable of, his subordinates could only hope he would reconsider and not take her words to heart. Agreeing to her request, everyone was led to the beach. The zombie with a sack over his head felt a gnawing dread about what was about to unfold. They all stood in anticipation, waiting to see what the protagonist would do next. The inspector, puzzled by their sudden change of scenery, couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The shadow of the protagonist loomed large, exuding an aura that was both commanding and unsettling. Understanding his boss all too well, the zombie with a sack over his head felt compelled to offer the inspector one last piece of advice. Everything, absolutely everything that happens from here on out is your fault. We're no longer involved. Terrified by his warning, she exchanged a fleeting glance with the zombie. By that time, he had already begun to unleash his power. One of the men felt a surge of anxiety as the rocks around them began to levitate. The protagonist was radiating an even greater power, his body undergoing yet another transformation. This time, he morphed into the archetypal hero, a figure of undeniable strength. Despite having faced zombies all day, it was the sight of a human face that truly sent chills down their spines. They were bewildered, unable to comprehend what had happened to the protagonist. Until now, the ocean waves had flowed effortlessly, but as he unleashed his immense power, the water stilled as if it had turned to stone. The atmosphere around him shifted dramatically, becoming almost palpable. Those nearby sensed a change in the very air they breathed, its density thickening with an unexplainable tension. Confusion washed over them. They had no idea what he was about to do. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he propelled himself into the sky, sending them tumbling backward. His strength was immeasurable, generating a small epicenter of shock waves. Had it not been for the kindness of the nearby zombies, the inspector's assistants would still be airborne. She struggled to keep her footing, and as she looked ahead, she realized the president had vanished. They were left in the dark with no clue about what was happening or where he could have gone. With surprising gentleness, a zombie offered her a telescope, allowing her to glimpse the unfolding scene. This small instrument, equipped with astonishing lenses, boasted a magnification power that seemed impossible for its size. As she peered through it, she found herself staring directly at the rings of Saturn, a celestial marvel that was unimaginably distant from Earth. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, President Zombie walked with an air of calm determination. Realizing the impossible, the inspector felt a wave of panic wash over him. Against all odds, that man had seemingly teleported to Saturn, moving with a speed that defied comprehension. The distance was thousands of times greater than Earth's circumference, a feat that remained unattainable, even with the most advanced technology. For them, this was the ultimate limit. Even if he were human, what he had accomplished was beyond the realm of human capabilities. Resolute in showcasing more of his power, the protagonist extended his hand. Gradually, he began to close it, as if preparing to unleash a devastating strike, adopting a poised and offensive stance. Once he felt ready, he swung his entire arm, delivering an astonishingly powerful blow. Even from Earth, they sensed it had crossed into a realm of peril. In a panic, the lone shark commanded everyone to take cover at once. The wind generated by that single motion was nothing short of monumental, unleashing a small cataclysm in the heart of the ocean. Towering waves, fit for an apocalyptic scene, surged toward the continent. On the beach, panic swept through the crowd as people stood frozen, overwhelmed by fear. Meanwhile, at headquarters, the ground trembled violently, shaking the very foundation of the building. A piercing alarm echoed throughout the city, announcing the imminent threat. A level 12 tsunami had been detected. Violet, upon hearing the news, was struck with disbelief. The reality of the situation was nothing short of terrifying. The colossal surge of water threatened to obliterate the entire human race. Dawn could only scream in terror, paralyzed by the overwhelming reality. Even if they had the will to act, they were utterly powerless. The city's defense system activated at its most basic level, massive walls rising in a desperate attempt to contain the oncoming tide. Meanwhile, far out in the ocean, a strange clearing began to take shape. The water had receded from the area, revealing the epicenter of the impact where the protagonist stood, eager to gauge whether this display of power was enough to prove his strength. From the vantage point of space, the full extent of the event was visible, a breathtaking spectacle. The inspector, rendered speechless by the sight, felt like an ant beneath the watchful gaze of the protagonist, who surveyed them with an air of quiet confidence. Transforming once more, he set off toward his city, flanked by his loyal subordinates. Meanwhile, the inspection team reached a startling conclusion. Even monsters possessed more humanity than that individual. Their taxi sped away, heading back to a place they should never have abandoned. Despite the overwhelming show of force, it was clear that the city would remain firmly in their grasp. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, intriguing developments were taking place within the prison walls. The soldiers stood guard, their vigilance unwavering. As they examined the body of the zombie king, confusion lingered in the air. They struggled to understand how this creature had managed to overpower him. It was truly remarkable that the mad professor had succeeded in creating such a formidable life form. He had attempted to create a god, but unfortunately the creature lay lifeless before him. Despite the professor's ambitions, it showed no signs of life. Meanwhile, lurking in the shadows, an undercover spy diligently carried out his mission. Following the professor's meticulous instructions, he carefully mixed the ingredients in precise proportions, hoping to breathe life back into the zombie once more. He had to wait for the perfect moment to inject the solution into the dormant body. As soon as the patrol guard announced he would step out for his round, the spy sprang into action. He managed to strike the creature's neck with the injection, but it wasn't long before he was caught by the head officer on the floor. In a panic, the officer demanded to know if the spy understood the gravity of what he had just done. The creature's eyes glowed with malevolence once more. Suddenly, explosions erupted throughout the prison, shaking its very foundations. The president, who had once underestimated the zombie, now found himself gripped by sheer terror. Alarms blared relentlessly, echoing through the halls as smoke billowed from the wreckage. The zombie king had awakened again, as if he had emerged from a long, dark nightmare. He received orders from the professor to get them out of there. The professor had promised to make him even stronger than that other monster. Above, an aircraft was approaching the prison. Inside, someone was furiously kicking the hatch that kept them locked in. With one final, powerful kick, the door flew open, sending it hurtling into the air and putting all the passengers in jeopardy. The plane had been hijacked, and the hijackers commanded everyone to remain still. They assured the passengers that as long as they cooperated, no one would be harmed. Faced with the gravity of the situation, the crew members chose to comply. Meanwhile, the Blood Queen had donned her attire, ready for the unfolding chaos. Her subordinate reminded her of the bomb strapped to the professor's body, a grim reminder of the stakes at play. She understood the gravity of the situation, yet there were no alternatives. To her, it felt like nothing more than a human deception. If she couldn't manage this herself, she wouldn't deserve the title of queen. As soon as they reached the target location, they leaped from the aircraft, descending toward the prison. The queen's orders were unmistakable. They had to be even more ruthless than the humans. Inside the prison, several presidents were alerted to the invasion. It felt like a grand conspiracy aimed at triggering a mass breakout. Tension filled the air as everyone braced for the worst. The vampires had breached the facility, facing fierce resistance from the soldiers. Amid the chaos, one of the humans urged everyone to remain calm, reminding them that there were still 30 presidents inside the facility. In the lower levels, the tension was palpable as they realized a prison break might be in progress. Meanwhile, the Blood Queen remained unfazed by the chaos surrounding her. Positioned in the upper levels, she was flanked by the professor and all the presidents, who were tasked with securing the facility. However, in the depths of the prison, where the true prisoner was confined, one of the presidents had already endured more than his fair share of brutal beatings. The zombie king had achieved his goal effortlessly. He despised the professor, relishing the thought of leaving him to rot in his cell. With a smirk, the professor appeared to have anticipated this very reaction. Meanwhile, his bespectacled lackey began to panic. The professor declared that this was his creation, no ordinary zombie, but a formidable being capable of defeating him. It was wise not to attempt anything reckless in his presence. Those words stirred the creature's hostility, but before it could make a move, the professor spoke calmly, offering reassurance. He made it clear that as long as he received help in achieving his dreams, he had little concern for his own survival. The zombie king, recognizing the terrifying nature of humans, admitted his desire to grow even stronger. With that, the professor reassured him that he never went back on his word. Outside the prison walls, tremors and explosions echoed through the air. The presidents fought valiantly to repel the invaders, but they were clueless about their identities, and frankly, they didn't care. The Blood Queen had no intention of explaining herself to mere extras. With unshakable confidence, she strode forward, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. She presented them with two options: surrender the professor or discover just how powerful she truly was. Undeterred, the first president resolved to attack. Despite the tension in the air, the queen remained unmoved. The president stood firm, unwilling to let her have her way within the confines of the prison. The fight concluded more swiftly than anyone anticipated. Shattered pieces of cyborgs lay strewn across the floor, remnants of a battle that had unfolded in the blink of an eye. The soldiers, mere mortals, were gripped by fear, yet they pressed on, unleashing a hail of gunfire. The queen, however, remained unfazed. She knew their human weaponry posed no real threat to her. rifles began to unleash their deadly symphony, but the bullets struck her skin and merely fell to the ground, unable to even tear her clothes. She remained completely unfazed, not even bothering to blink. One of the vampires extended her hand, a mocking gesture towards human technology. Meanwhile, more explosions erupted within the prison walls. Meanwhile, on the lower levels, the professor's rescue mission pressed on. The mad scientist was taken aback. How had the bomb not been triggered? In that moment, the professor revealed a crucial detail. They had a 2-second window after the power cut out. With that knowledge, they could resume their escape. However, the scientists couldn't shake the worry that their actions might only serve to make that creature even more formidable. However, the professor possessed 2 more bodies that were even more formidable. At last, they succeeded in liberating him from his prison chamber. The sight that greeted the zombie king was intriguing. The humans present appeared utterly defeated. Given their condition, it was clear that the enemy was exceptionally powerful. Something deeper was unfolding here. A mysterious figure loomed among the fallen bodies. The Blood Queen had finally revealed herself. She had come to confront the professor, declaring that anyone unable to even touch the zombie in its second form was unworthy of being an experiment. Panic surged through the scientist as he questioned how she had discovered that detail. Meanwhile, the zombie king observed, intrigued, pondering the identity of this enigmatic woman. Recognizing their shared enemy, she boldly proposed using her body to further their cause. Drawing on her extensive scientific and technical expertise, she awaited the professor's response. The zombie king, feeling provoked, questioned whether this scantily clad woman truly believed she was stronger than him. With unwavering confidence, she affirmed her superiority, adding that it wasn't just by a narrow margin. If she wished, she could easily prove it in that moment. Without hesitation, the two clashed. The queen emerged victorious, her strike landing with precision. For those unaware of her strength, it was a completely unexpected outcome. She showcased her overwhelming power. Had the zombie possessed wings, he surely would have taken flight. Now, he resembled a projectile, barreling through everything in his path. Having already faced defeat at the hands of the protagonist, he knew from experience that her power matched his own. Yet, he was determined not to let the fight conclude in such a manner. As he glanced at the prison's nuclear reactor, a brilliant idea sparked in his mind. An idea worthy of a true genius. If he couldn't emerge victorious, then everyone would turn to dust alongside him. With all his strength, the mad scientist struck the reactor, seizing the moment to declare that this man had never been trustworthy. A chain reaction ignited, and it was only a matter of time before everything erupted. With a mere flick of her wrist, the queen turned her gaze toward the reactor. She lowered her hand, fingers outstretched, commanding reality itself to reverse the explosion. It was a display of power that none of them had anticipated. As if that weren't enough, she seemed to manipulate gravity, pinning the immortal creature beneath the immense weight of her weapon. His ashen body now resembled a piece of gum stuck to the pavement, utterly defeated. The humans found themselves grappling with the horrifying sight before them. It was undeniably terrifying. The queen sneered at the creature, a being so feeble yet audacious enough to call himself king. It was time to impart a lesson. Holding the creature firmly in her grasp, she was determined to uncover how the protagonist had managed to defeat him. Though he heard the question, the defeated creature was still grappling with the weight of his brutal loss. The queen's gaze was devoid of patience, a stark reminder of how far he was from true power. He had witnessed this before. These two beings were remnants of a civilization long gone. A deep terror began to seep into his mind, threatening to overwhelm him. He fell completely still before her, the queen having revealed his true place in the world. As she let his lifeless body drop to the ground, the once revived zombie king ceased to breathe once more. In that moment, she showcased her immense power to everyone present, effortlessly subjugating a formidable being, as if it were nothing. Before her stood the zombie king, reduced to nothing more than an insect. The presidents who had fallen to that creature now recognized that this woman was in a league of her own. You and the mad scientist grappled with the reality of what they had just witnessed. Finally, she shifted her gaze to the professor, intrigued and eager to determine if he was worthy of becoming her next experiment. She waited anxiously for a positive response, but the professor was too stunned to reply after witnessing what had just unfolded. She was more than capable. Meanwhile, at the top of City A's town hall, the misbehaving zombie continued to face its punishment. Violet had arrived to speak with the protagonist. She had an urgent matter to discuss. Despite being warned that this wasn't the best time, Violet couldn't afford to wait. It was an emergency. His subordinate attempted to caution her about the dangers ahead, but Violet brushed off his concerns, claiming she had no idea what he meant. With determination, she stepped into the president's office, announcing that she had terrible news. The protagonist greeted her with a casual demeanor, revealing that he was currently in his second form. Now she grasped the peril she was in, yet it struck her as odd that the protagonist remained so calm despite the circumstances. He mentioned that he enjoyed shaking things up occasionally and asked what had led her to this moment. Without a moment's hesitation, she revealed that the professor had escaped from prison. He already knew this. After all, no prison could ever truly hold that fiery red-headed woman. Just 10 minutes earlier, Violet found herself puzzled by how he already seemed to know. The Queen had unleashed her bloodline power, and he had sensed the surge of energy. The mention of bloodline made Violet pause. She realized she needed to relay this information to her superiors. However, since she was already there, the protagonist gently urged her not to rush off. It had been a while since he had last interacted peacefully with a human. Out of all the requests she could have anticipated, this was the last one she expected. Shaking off his hand, she replied that she already knew what had happened to the inspector, adding that she didn't have time to play tour guide. They were in the midst of a crisis and her attention was needed elsewhere. It was then that the protagonist asked if she wanted to know how he had used his bloodline power. That question sparked her curiosity. She had never imagined he possessed such a remarkable ability. Fixing his gaze on her with an intensity that was almost threatening, the protagonist simply smiled. Violet found herself at a loss for words. Faced with the chance to learn more, she agreed to go on a date with him. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, chaos reigned. They were working tirelessly to revive the fallen presidents. Despite their grave injuries, a faint breath still escaped their lips. The doctor noticed the chief struggled to speak and leaned in closer, eager to catch his words. It was vital to communicate with the department head. Meanwhile, the villains had finally convened in a secure location, plotting their next move. It was a profound disappointment to see the Queen dressed in casual attire. For the professor, it was the first time he had examined such an extraordinary figure. The vampire cautioned that the experiment needed to succeed, as their patience was wearing thin. Yet, the scientist remained steadfast, asserting that the professor's research was the foundation of human advancement. After all, the protagonist had previously achieved a remarkable success in his own right. Despite her being a vampire, the experiment would succeed. All that was required were the protagonist's genes. Aware of this, the vampires secretly hoped they wouldn't be the ones assigned to collect that genetic material. The professor reassured them that he wasn't foolish enough to send them to their doom. Yet, unease lingered among them, as the possibility of a perilous mission still loomed. They were curious about his plans for acquiring the material, and whether he anticipated it would be delivered as a gift. The Queen, too, appeared intrigued. With a sly grin, the scientist prepared to unveil his revelation. They already possessed a sample of the genetic material. The vampires were taken aback, utterly bewildered by how he had managed to obtain it. A human had gathered genetic samples during a series of experiments to determine if she had transformed into a zombie. One of the professor's spies successfully extracted a sample. The vampires were taken aback by the human's cunning. Planting spies among their enemies was an exceptionally effective strategy. Now it was time to set their plans in motion. In City Edge, Violet had gone out to dinner with the protagonist. His abilities truly matched his name, but she couldn't shake the fear that she might not return to her usual self, or worse, that there could be unforeseen side effects. As her doubts swirled, he offered her a reassuring smile. Violet anticipated that he would continue his explanation, but to her annoyance, the protagonist reverted to his base form. He wasn't supposed to change forms before finishing what he started. That was simply irresponsible. Frustrated, she attempted to compel him to switch back to a second form. However, he stood firm, reminding her that he never pressured her into going out with him. She came of her own volition. When she asked the waiter for some pepper, he informed her that all of it had been confiscated from the city. Following that encounter, 2 long months slipped by. This was the woman's second visit to the man in the hospital. His last request had been for a message to be delivered. After that, he had slipped into unconsciousness. She followed the instructions, utilizing satellite technology to classify the message as a code red emergency. It was truly remarkable that a single woman had accomplished all of this within the confines of the prison. The vampire had even managed to reverse a nuclear explosion. What was more astonishing was that she seemed out of place in this era. She was aware of her uniqueness, and all of this information had already been relayed to the department head. Deep within the underground of an abandoned city, remnants of advanced technology flickered to life. It resembled a hidden metropolis, steeped in forgotten knowledge. One of the men suddenly received a message, urgency etched on his face. He approached the department head, reporting the unfolding emergency. The head of the department emerged, clad in a striking suit of armor that exuded both power and style, his hairstyle defying practicality and making any battle seem even more challenging. Amidst the ancient ruins, they discovered human remains among them. A mummy. This was the only genetic material unearthed in the desolate city. A soldier reported the alarming details of the situation. Professor Jamie, who had been imprisoned, had escaped. The revelation sent a ripple of unease through the ranks, leaving even the most seasoned soldiers visibly shaken. Before them lay a body from an ancient era of humanity. Upon closer inspection, they discovered 134 fractures clearly inflicted by a monstrous force. This chilling revelation sent shivers down the spines of the soldiers. Even more horrifying was the fact that the body had been burned to a crisp, preserving it for millennia. Now it stood as nothing more than an empty husk, a haunting reminder of a long-lost past. As they surveyed the area, it became evident that a monumental battle had unfolded here. The creature responsible for the devastation of this once advanced civilization was undeniably formidable. There was little left to investigate. The department head was eager to uncover the details of the emergency and soon discovered that several presidents had sustained injuries during the incident. The headquarters was now in a state of crisis, its combat capabilities severely diminished. Realizing the significance of their discovery, the department head concluded it was time to return. Just before they departed, one of the soldiers spotted something unusual. Inscriptions were carved into the ground of the ancient city, and as they examined them, a long-dormant system sprang to life. Metallic spheres began to levitate, and a hologram materialized before their eyes. It was astonishing that such advanced technology had endured through the ages. The figure within the hologram observed with intrigue, noting that it was the first time it had encountered a human with such formidable strength. The soldiers urged their department head to proceed with caution, but to him, it was merely a projection, enigmatic and shrouded in mystery. The holographic figure scrutinized the men before it. It boldly claimed that it could enhance the department head's power, provided he pledged to safeguard humanity. To him, it felt only natural. Within those ancient ruins, his desire was to unravel the mysteries of history and understand how an entire civilization had been wiped from existence. As the enigmatic figure loomed behind him, a film began to play. The humans watched with bated breath, eager to discover what would unfold. To their astonishment, the figure that emerged was none other than the protagonist himself. It was so bizarre it felt like a bad joke. 1,000 years ago, Earth was not confined to just 2 large continents. Instead, it boasted 8 oceans, 7 continents, and numerous nations. Humanity had united to such an extent that they could create remarkable inventions. They had attained a level of knowledge that enabled them to build space stations. Their technology had advanced beyond imagination, enabling them to forge incredible weapons. They had even battled aliens. Yet the technology of those extraterrestrial foes paled in comparison to what humanity had developed. Even the monsters lurking in the depths of the earth trembled at the thought of mankind. However, there was one being they had never managed to conquer: the zombie. After hearing his brief history, they couldn't help but wonder why they had failed to stop him. He was the answer to everything, the reason behind it all. While it was easy to believe, it wasn't the revelation they had anticipated. One soldier harbored doubts, suspecting they were being deceived. The figure in the phone note didn't appear strong at all. To the department head, it seemed unlikely that an ancient civilization would squander its time on deceit. The academies were established to combat the relentless threat of zombies. Yet despite humanity's unwavering efforts, they had never succeeded in eradicating them. Perhaps this individual held the key to their ongoing struggle. The department head pondered their next move, acutely aware that time was slipping away. They had invested heavily in technology, but witnessing such a formidable presence ignited a flicker of hope. The union of a powerful physical form with the remnants of ancient technology held the key to defeating the creature. Suddenly, a gauntlet materialized before them, a relic from a long-lost civilization. Its holographic projection flickered to life, delivering a stark warning: they must not forget the lessons of the past. No matter what races emerged on Earth, humanity's greatest enemy remained the zombies. The department head commanded a soldier to retrieve the artifact, but he hesitated. As he grasped the object, he vowed that humanity would not let them down. All that lingered in that desolate place was a withered corpse, nothing else of value to salvage. A soldier inquired whether they were going to pursue the individual in the photo. However, their immediate focus was on addressing the professor's escape. The world was vast, and locating a single zombie would be akin to searching for a needle in a haystack. Just then, Violet received a crucial call. The department head had finally returned and was summoning all the presidents for an urgent meeting. The zombie was taken aback to learn that he was also expected to attend. He had no clue who the department head even was. Meanwhile, in the professor's lab, his experiment appeared to be advancing successfully. A smile spread across his face as he believed he had finally reached his goal: the enhancement of the Queen's body. Bit by bit, the protagonist's genes were being absorbed into her. Meanwhile, the queen's vampire minions grew increasingly impatient. Their tribe's entire wealth amounted to a mere single coin. Even if they held 10 jobs, they still wouldn't be able to feed their people. That solitary coin had been earned through begging. Their lives had become so wretched that they longed for an end to their suffering. One companion reminded them of their strength, urging them to consider alternative ways to earn a living. The suggestion felt almost laughable. They struggled to think of anything that could bring in money. Then, with a glint of mischief in his eye, he proposed a simple solution. Let's rob a bank. As they made their way through town, they happened to pass a bank, and through the windows, the people inside appeared to move in slow motion, oblivious to the world around them. A simple withdrawal stretched into nearly an hour. They had never witnessed such sluggishness in people before. With their skills, they could have robbed the place in just 10 seconds, untraceable and effortless. All it would take was to grab the money and vanish. That was enough to persuade the vampire to commit this minor crime. Meanwhile, at headquarters, everyone was assembling. A soldier reported to the department head that all the presidents were present. The meeting could finally commence. The department head donned his impressively cool helmet, signaling that he was ready to lead. For the zombie, it was a first having to obey a superior as a president. Meanwhile, the Blood Queen continued to evolve, her power amplified by the protagonist's genes. In a city where life seemed to move at a languid pace, a group of individuals was quietly preparing to rob a bank. These were the Queen's underlings, keenly observing the rhythm of the crowd. Time appeared to flow differently here, and now they were poised to put their meticulously crafted plan into action. There was no room for error. The bank had been meticulously studied, and the crowd inside was sparse. These were seasoned professionals, experts at robbing banks. From the top floor of a nearby building, the lone shark awaited updates on the city below. The reports from last month were finally ready for review. At last, the robbers were set to put their elaborate plan into motion. They stormed into the bank, heavily armed, unaware that they had just breached the infamous Bank of City at the stronghold of the zombies. According to the soldiers' calculations, the bank's economic assets surpassed a staggering $430 billion. Longshark, their commanding officer, ordered an immediate recalculation. They couldn't afford any missteps. After all, they served the most powerful being in existence. The soldiers, fueled by enthusiasm and unwavering determination, nodded in agreement without a moment's hesitation. Meanwhile, on the first floor, the vampires declared their audacious heist. It didn't take long for them to seize a staggering amount of money. As the Longshark observed the city, he noticed unusual activity unfolding. The vampires were already making their escape, reveling in the belief that they would never again face the specter of poverty. Just then, an urgent alert arrived, shattering their moment of triumph. Blackie received the shocking news. They had just been robbed. It couldn't be real. Such an event was simply unacceptable in this city. Yet, as he contemplated the vast sum of money involved, the vampire leader couldn't suppress a flicker of delight. But then, in an instant, a familiar and threatening presence washed over him, calling his name. He had experienced this feeling before, but now it hit him with a new intensity, fury. How could his subordinate have failed to check the ownership of that bank? But then again, it was a harsh truth his underling couldn't read. They had just learned the hard way that the bank they had robbed belonged to the zombies. Now they were undoubtedly in for a long and brutal reckoning. Their escape was swiftly cut off. The vampire leader was already in a state of panic, sensing the looming threat even from afar, the menacing aura of the zombies closing in. Now, the city's financial administrator was hot on the heels of the thieves. The vampire's desperation escalated dramatically. He barked an order to the driver to accelerate. After all, the Longshark was the most enigmatic of the zombie subordinates, and he knew they had to outrun it. He had been by his side for years. Blackie didn't concern himself with the vampire's schemes, but he had one crucial piece of advice for them if they wanted to survive. Stepping forward with resolve, he prepared to deliver his message. It was straightforward. Anyone who wished to avoid the wrath of the Longshark should return the money immediately. With a single leap, he unleashed a shockwave that reverberated through the entire building. Cars were hurled into the air, and those inside had no clue what was unfolding. Outside, the chaos intensified. The vampire stood in disbelief, unable to comprehend the sheer magnitude of his power. It was nothing short of overwhelming. The money they had stolen wouldn't even cover the cost of repairing their car. They were utterly doomed, and they knew it. The Longshark was spiraling out of control. Blackie stood his ground, unwavering in his demands. The vampire leader commanded them to split up and alert the Queen about their actions. He chose to stay behind, insisting he would hold off their pursuer. He was eager to test his strength against the lung shark, but Blackie quickly reminded him of the stakes. None of them were permitted to flee, and they were far from evenly matched in this battle. The lung shark unleashed his fists, ready to collect his due. As the brutal scene unfolded, panic spread among the other vampires. Their leader was already incapacitated and completely out of the fight. At the headquarters city, the presidents gathered, anticipation hanging in the air as they awaited the arrival of the department head. When he finally stepped in, a chorus of salutes greeted him. Aware of the professor's escape, he nonetheless had a more pressing issue to address. With a solemn air, he unveiled the artifact recovered from the ancient ruins. The golden gauntlet captivated everyone in the room. An artifact from ancient times, it left all the presidents in awe. The department head revealed that he had unearthed it from the depths of a canyon. One of the supporting officers speculated that this discovery could turn the tide in their battle against the professor. However, the department head quickly interjected, clarifying that it would be wielded against an even greater evil. The message left by the ancient civilization revealed a far greater threat looming over Earth-1 that had led to their own destruction. The mere knowledge of such a monster sent shivers down the spines of the presidents. Violet, unable to grasp the gravity of it all, even questioned if it was some kind of joke. The thought of such a being was simply overwhelming. The department head solemnly confirmed that the ancient civilization had underscored the peril posed by this existence. They had to tread carefully. For Violet, the idea that such a powerful being could still exist was unfathomable. The department head confessed that he had no idea where this creature might be, but he stressed the importance of remaining vigilant. Intrigued by the gauntlet, the protagonist inquired about its use. The department head clarified that all they needed to do was wear it and press the activation button. He stressed the urgency of finding and eliminating the creature as soon as possible. Suddenly, a realization hit him. Someone was standing beside him, drawing his attention. He turned to face the protagonist, only to find that the same foolish expression was mirrored by the menacing entity. It was impossible that it had been there the entire time. The department head moved quickly, seizing the gauntlet and leaving everyone in shock. At the same time, the vampire's body hurtled toward the headquarters building, seemingly destined for disaster. In an uncanny twist of fate, he crashed right into the meeting room. As the dust settled, the department head stood triumphant, the gauntlet firmly in hand. Violet watched, bewildered, struggling to grasp the unfolding chaos. The room lay in ruins from the recent impact, and in one corner, the vampire slumped, clearly defeated. Just moments later, Lackey entered, his resolve hardening as he prepared to exact punishment for the chaos the vampire had wrought upon his city. The vampire whimpered, desperately longing for rescue from his queen. Yet, to those present, the identities of these figures remained a mystery, and none had ever encountered this vampire before. Violet soon recognized him as one of the protagonist's subordinates. The curious zombie inquired about the lone shark's presence. Meanwhile, one of the soldiers picked up a signal with his systems. Outside, Lackey continued to watch, now completely encircled by the most formidable leaders. One of the side characters was resolute in proving to this zombie that he was out of place here. Furious, Lackey declared that this was not their concern and began to demonstrate the vast gap in their power levels. The presidents were being struck down as if they were mere children. Even that small group stood no chance against a single subordinate of the protagonist. They were swiftly and effortlessly subdued. The women quickly realized that Blackie was far stronger than the chainsaw zombie. The side character had been strategically positioned next to the vampire, as they both often found themselves on the receiving end of a beating. Blackie, however, had lost his patience. It was time to take action. The swirling dust in the air looked perilous, prompting Violet to urgently warn the girl not to touch it. The protagonist was ready to intervene and correct his subordinate. With a gentle but firm hand, he halted Blackie's aggressive actions. Blackie, already on the brink of being subdued, was taken aback by the sudden appearance of his boss. Just then, another shockwave erupted, sending the others sprawling. A soldier quickly reported to the department head about the new president's formidable strength. The president standing before him appeared as insignificant as ants. The ancient civilization had been correct. He was indeed powerful. After halting his subordinate's actions, the protagonist led him to the rooftop of a towering building. Blackie, curious and concerned, asked what was happening. The zombie reminded him with a hint of exasperation that he couldn't kill anyone. Meanwhile, the department head activated the gauntlet, setting the stage for what was to come. The protagonist was explaining to his subordinate that this was the headquarters of the group responsible for granting them control over the city, when suddenly his speech was interrupted. A solar eclipse began to unfold in the sky, an unexpected phenomenon that left everyone bewildered. The daylight faded, plunging the surroundings into darkness, and a palpable tension grew among the citizens as anxiety spread through the crowd. At last, the Blood Queen emerged, her first appearance since her transformation. Shadows swirled around her, drawing the attention of those nearby. The department head struggled to comprehend the unfolding chaos, while the prison's guardians, the presidents, recognized her instantly. With a wicked smile, the Queen proclaimed her newfound invincibility, sending a chill through the air. The other vampires rushed to rescue their comrade, who lay motionless on the ground, a victim of a brutal beating. Upon witnessing his fragile state, the Queen commanded her subordinates to retrieve him. However, their efforts were swiftly thwarted by the department head's formidable power. They found themselves powerless against that human. The Queen quickly took notice, but her indifference was palpable. Anticipating the situation would escalate, the department head ordered the evacuation of the city. With a smirk, the Queen dismissed the human, reminding him that this was not his concern. Undeterred, the department head, gripping the gauntlet tightly, launched an attack and struck her. She felt a surge of pain, igniting a fierce rage within her. With renewed determination, she retaliated with equal ferocity. The other women quickly recognized that the Queen possessed a strength beyond their comprehension. Meanwhile, a lackey informed the protagonist that the humans had begun their fight. However, the zombies dismissed the conflict, claiming it was not their concern. The battle raged on. As the eclipse began to fade, the gauntlet on the department head's arm shifted in its composition. With unwavering confidence, he declared that he would eliminate the Queen before confronting the zombie. "That's quite bold of you," the woman remarked, while the protagonist's friends exchanged puzzled glances, wondering which zombie he was talking about. Channeling the full power of the gauntlet, the department head aimed to resolve the conflict with a single decisive strike. Yet, the Queen remained unfazed, equally intent on bringing the confrontation to a swift conclusion. Like two titans from a Dragon Ball Z showdown, they were on a collision course. The Queen readied a devastating blow, mirroring the department head's own fierce preparation. They were just moments away from colliding high above the city. The ensuing shockwave was nothing short of devastating. As anticipated, the Queen's fist overpowered the gauntlet, sending the department head hurtling through the air. He crashed violently into a building, the impact catastrophic. With his arms shattered and the gauntlet in ruins, he fought to regain his composure. The Queen remained utterly unimpressed by the lackluster display of power before her. Meanwhile, the department head began to suspect that this so-called ancient technology was nothing more than a clever ruse. "If this is what I'm relying on, I shouldn't have even bothered," he muttered to himself. Yet the Queen recognized him as the strongest human she had ever encountered. 1,000 years ago, their battle might have unfolded quite differently. But the present told a different story. Now, she was poised to send him into an eternal slumber. Just as she prepared to deliver the final blow, an ominous threat loomed closer. A swift and precise slash cut through the air, forcing her to narrowly evade the attack. Violet stepped forward, declaring that the Queen was targeting the wrong opponent. The Queen was determined to uncover the identity of this formidable foe. With her sword poised on her back, Violet stepped forward, declaring herself as the Queen's challenger. Her demeanor had shifted dramatically. She now embodied the very essence of the protagonist's lineage. Those who beheld her transformation stood in stunned silence. Meanwhile, the vampire girl continued her desperate efforts to save her fallen companion. But Dawn had no intention of letting that happen easily. As she observed the woman's transformation, the vampire trembled in fear, realizing just how extraordinary these opponents were. The Queen quickly sensed the presence of another enhanced woman nearby. The two locked eyes, exchanging brief but intense glares, while the vampire boldly declared that her opponent wouldn't escape unscathed. Tension hung in the air as the three powerful women stood on the brink of battle. Violet's aura had transformed entirely. With her sword drawn, she braced herself to confront the Queen. The apartment head lay gravely wounded, a silent testament to the chaos that had unfolded. No one could pinpoint exactly what had changed within Violet, but it was clear she was no longer the same. The vampire stood resolute, refusing to let Dawn have her way. Breaking free from her grip, she swiftly created distance between them. This only piqued Dawn's interest in her prey even more. Irritated, the vampire declared, "I'm not just any ordinary opponent. You're not weak. Let's prove it," Dawn challenged, her confidence unwavering. As the vampire's attack closed in, she remained unimpressed by its speed. She intercepted the attack with ease, the outcome of this fight already predetermined. Dawn began to overpower the vampire effortlessly, leaving the observing presidents in shock at her strength. The vampire attempted to evade her strikes with bizarre acrobatics, but there was a hidden trick in her movements that hinted at a deeper strategy. Using a small amount of her own blood, she conjured clones of herself. Yet, none could stand against Dawn. The clones swiftly dissipated, leaving the vampire questioning whether Dawn was even human. The Blood Queen steeled herself for battle. Violet, too, drew her sword, but the sheer magnitude of her power was undeniable. She sliced effortlessly through the buildings behind her, leaving the main headquarters teetering on the brink of collapse, much to the horror of the presidents. The sheer power she wielded was astonishing, evoking a sense of familiarity that sent shivers down their spines. The queen understood what had transpired. This woman had also been empowered. Yet, despite this revelation, the queen's desire remained unwavering. She craved revenge against her enemy. As she opened her eyes, her pupils glimmered with a newfound intensity. This moment had been a long time coming, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to fulfill her goal. Yet, despite the overwhelming display of power, Violet remained unfazed. She acknowledged her own limitations, admitting that she couldn't compete with the queen. If that was all the queen had to offer, then perhaps she should reconsider her quest for vengeance against the zombie. "Allow me to show you something truly entertaining," Violet smirked, igniting the queen's curiosity. With a hand raised to her face, her power began to shift. She was on the brink of revealing her second transformation. The skin on her face started to change, shifting colors in a mesmerizing display. Violet's body contorted in an unnatural way, leaving the presidents increasingly awestruck by the unfolding battle. She had grown significantly stronger, and even the queen found herself uncertain of what to expect from her. Condensed energy began to coalesce, radiating a deep violet glow. The presidents braced themselves, needing to shield against the powerful force emanating from her. The queen was genuinely taken aback as a mask formed on Violet's face, revealing an expressionless visage with cold, deep eyes. The presidents were utterly terrified, struggling to comprehend the scene unfolding before them. Even the queen felt a sense of awe. Remarkably, even the protagonist hadn't anticipated such rapid progress. Dawn found herself captivated by her newfound ability to change forms. As she watched the events unfold, the queen fell deep into thought. Violet, sensing the tension, declared that words were now pointless. This time, the queen decided to take the offensive. Yet, Violet matched her with equal skill, both women poised and ready to continue their fierce battle. The queen proclaimed that only the weak depend on words. In response, Violet coated her blade with a crimson liquid. The enhancement instantly fortified her sword, amplifying both its resilience and power. With a fierce determination, she struck the queen with a devastating blow. The sheer force of her attack was so astonishing that it sent a wave of fear rippling through the onlookers. Violet had reduced her opponent to mere cellular fragments, leaving behind only the faintest traces of what was once a person. As fear coursed through the humans, desperation took hold of the vampires, who were paralyzed by the thought that their queen had been vanquished. With a calm demeanor, Violet sheathed her sword, believing the battle to be concluded. The sensors confirmed that every cell in the queen's body had somehow been severed. It felt like a cruel joke. Such a feat should be impossible. Yet the blue-haired woman had no doubt about what had transpired. The department stood frozen, speechless in disbelief. Violet knew the queen was still alive, lurking in the shadows, plotting an unexpected counterattack. Slowly, her scattered cells began to merge in the air, reassembling her body. Violet stood patiently, allowing the queen to complete her restoration. The process unfolded at a molecular level, and soon the queen emerged, fully regenerated, but with one notable difference. Her clothes had not been restored. The watching presidents exchanged glances, their uncertainty deepening. They could no longer tell if these beings were even human. Meanwhile, the protagonist sensed that Red was preparing to fight seriously. Intrigued by the impending clash, he suggested they relocate to a spot with a better view. Violet, already aware of her opponent's immortality, remained calm. In contrast, the department head, who had been oblivious until now, appeared visibly shaken. He could feel a shift within the gauntlet, a foreboding sign of what was to come. The protagonist quickly warned everyone to evacuate the building. Things were about to escalate into a far more perilous situation. The queen was now fully clothed, her regal presence restored, while Violet stood poised for battle. With a fierce determination, the vampire raised her hand toward the sky, summoning a massive cataclysm. "This fight is far from over," she declared, her voice echoing with fury. Violet felt a surge of excitement at her words. She, too, craved the thrill of combat. Meanwhile, the protagonist had found a secure vantage point, ready to witness the unfolding clash. The blue-haired woman and another president approached his position. Meanwhile, Violet and the queen unleashed chaos across the city. With each graceful movement of the queen's blade, devastation followed. A series of swift strikes allowed her to slice through an entire building, which crumbled into the air as if it were made of paper. Violet deftly evaded every attack, narrowing the distance to her opponent. Their blades met with a fierce clash, the sound echoing like thunder. But this time, the human was taken by surprise. Yet she refused to be defeated. With a fierce determination, she launched a devastating counterstrike against the queen. But as the presidents watched, they could almost feel their souls slipping away. Only one person truly rebelled in this battle, the protagonist, who observed with gleeful anticipation. Violet's slash stretched for thousands of kilometers, and the queen quickly grasped the sheer magnitude of the attack. She was far from pleased with how events were unfolding. Yet her determination never faltered for even a moment. The protagonist found herself thoroughly captivated by this overwhelming display of power. The blue-haired woman was baffled by how the queen still stood, defying all odds. Meanwhile, the department head grappled with the gauntlet that stubbornly clung to his arm. But Violet remained laser-focused on her goal, defeating the threat that loomed before her. The queen had no intention of making things easy for her opponent. Even aware of Violet's second transformation, she doubted that the human could ever match her power. This time, taking the offensive, she was resolute in her goal to end the battle once and for all. With a devastating palm strike, she unleashed an attack powerful enough to level an entire city. The sheer force of her assault was overwhelming, and the bystanders understood that if they were caught in its path, their fate would be sealed. Violet was unable to defend herself against the strike, her body absorbing the impact almost entirely. The queen stood poised, anticipating a reaction from her opponent, while the humans watched in deep concern. Violet remained motionless after the attack, and the department head continued to grapple with the gauntlet, which was now inflicting pain on his arm. A voice echoed in his mind, declaring its intention to take control of his body. Confusion washed over him as he struggled to grasp the identity of this voice, even as he felt his autonomy slipping away. Then it struck him. It was the same voice from the hologram he had encountered earlier. In a fleeting moment of clarity, Violet managed to regain her composure, acknowledging the truth in the queen's words. The two women exchanged icy glances, each sizing the other up. As Violet withdrew the sword from her own body, she recognized a bitter truth. She couldn't harm the queen. Yet, there was more to say. The queen, too, was powerless against her. The blue-haired woman grasped the reality of the situation and demanded that the protagonist grant her the same power. But he refused, fully aware that the consequences could be devastatingly violent. As they remained distracted, an enormous event unfolded. Neither Violet nor the queen noticed the shift, and even the bystanders were baffled by the strange sound that echoed around them. Meanwhile, beyond the Earth's atmosphere, colossal limbs began to emerge. Something had been revived. The colossal being loomed over the planet, its shadow casting a dark veil across vast regions. Panic seized the citizens, leaving them bewildered by the unimaginable sight before them. Meanwhile, in the city, chaos reigned as destruction unfolded. Amidst the turmoil, only the protagonist appeared unscathed, quickly realizing that countless lives were at risk. With incredible speed, he reached the group. One by one, he flung the humans far from the danger zone. The zombies quickly realized that the entire city had transformed into a perilous battleground. Meanwhile, that monstrous figure had zeroed in on the two women locked in combat. It was a robot of unimaginable size and power. Both the queen and Violet halted their fierce battle, momentarily bewildered by the sudden appearance of the colossal machine. Inside the robot, even the department head was at a loss, struggling to comprehend the unfolding events. The man from the hologram offered an apology, revealing that deception had been necessary. He had made the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of humanity. Some of the presidents had managed to find safety, all thanks to the protagonist. The most cowardly among them was desperate for answers, while the others were left speechless. Outside Earth's atmosphere, a colossal robot ascended into the void. Meanwhile, Violet remained oblivious to the unfolding chaos. Within the giant's enormous fingers, the protagonist was ensnared, caught in a precarious grip. Passengers aboard nearby aircraft were left in utter disbelief as the surreal scene unfolded before them. Gradually, the protagonist's expression shifted, revealing a mix of determination and concern. Faced with this new enemy, the women silently reached a temporary truce. The robot, looming ominously, assured them that this confrontation had nothing to do with them. It was controlled by a humanoid figure of average size yet strong enough to restrain both women effortlessly. Due to their close proximity, Violet was captured along with the queen. The controller of the robot revealed that they had been studying zombies for centuries. It was disheartening to learn that the women had relied on nothing more than stimulants for their attack. Throughout this exchange, the protagonist remained firmly held in the robot's grasp. Now, he had entered his first transformation. With newfound strength coursing through him, he twisted his torso, unleashing a surge of force that traveled through the robot's fingers. In an instant, that power raced up his arm. The robot's controller was caught off guard by this sudden escalation. Meanwhile, the protagonist pressed forward, determined to reach the heart of the problem. He closed the distance at a terrifying speed, but suddenly he was intercepted. The ancient robot countered his approach, having waited an entire millennium for this moment. At last, the day had arrived. The women, who had proven themselves overwhelmingly strong, had been completely subdued. The protagonist, however, was not pleased to be delayed. The moment for his rematch had arrived. He yearned to finally conquer the zombie and unveil its true form. In response to his resolve, the protagonist morphed into a generic character. Despite the robot's massive hand, it proved powerless to halt him. With a mere flick, the protagonist was sent soaring. Watching this unfold while frozen in place, the queen couldn't hide her astonishment. At that moment, a fierce battle raged between the zombie and the giant robot. The ancient being sensed that it was being gravely underestimated. Yet to the zombie, the robot held no awe. Meanwhile, on Earth, the blue-haired woman struggled to conceal her shock. As the protagonist climbed the towering figure of the robot, he focused on reaching its controller. A small crack began to widen, unveiling a vast compartment. Inside the colossal robot, several humanoid drones stood poised for battle. The presidents, witnessing this spectacle, felt woefully outmatched in terms of technology. Despite their superior numbers, the drones were powerless against the protagonist, who dismantled them as if they were mere clay figures. On the arm of the larger robot, they attempted to hinder his progress in every way they could. But there was nothing they could do against absolute power. In his most formidable form, the zombie was a force of nature, capable of even damaging the largest of the robots. As the ancient being marked its anniversary, it sensed that its enemy was still holding back. In response, it summoned even more colossal robots to Earth, escalating the absurdity of the battle with each passing moment. The ancient consciousness recalled its final night, having witnessed everything unfold. That formidable figure was not the zombie's ultimate form. The thought of him growing even stronger sent shivers through the hearts of those who dared to imagine it, as human reason could no longer contain their terror. The protagonist was struck by a powerful blow from one of the robots. As celestial bodies clashed, they wreaked havoc on Earth's cities. The impact unleashed consequences on a planetary scale. Thrown toward the moon, the protagonist's body careened across the lunar surface, ricocheting violently and leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Despite the chaos around him, he remained unfazed, his expression unchanged. The department chief struggled to regain control of his body, vehemently opposing the destruction unfolding before him. Yet, the ancient entity was resolute, intent on eradicating humanity's foe at any cost. Meanwhile, the robots pressed on in their relentless pursuit of the zombie. What was truly astonishing, however, was that even on Earth, the presidents appeared to be fully aware of the situation at hand. On the moon, a colossal robot resembling a human loomed ominously. The ancient warrior remained resolute in his mission to eradicate humanity's foe. Yet, the protagonist skillfully evaded every strike. Once more, one of them managed to close in on the robot's face. As he prepared to unleash another of his devastating blows, the sheer force of his strike shattered the construct, leaving a path of irreversible destruction in its wake. The ancient entity was quickly depleting its resources. The department chief, having reviewed the reports, noted that since assuming the presidency, the protagonist had conducted himself with unwavering integrity and fairness. He struggled to regain control of his body. Meanwhile, the city, under the protagonist's administration, continued to thrive, showing no signs of harm to its inhabitants. In fact, he often lent them a helping hand. This led the department chief to contemplate the possibility of coexistence. However, the ancient entity remained steadfast in its refusal to accept such an idea. Redirecting its violent intent toward the protagonist, it declared that peaceful coexistence had been attempted in past eras. Yet just looking at the protagonist made it painfully clear there was no chance for harmony with someone so overwhelmingly powerful. Zombies, once considered an insignificant race, had always lived in the shadows until the protagonist emerged from the void. Since that moment, humanity's fate hinged on this individual's whims. An entity of such power had no place among humans, and thus it deserved to be eradicated without delay. Transforming before their eyes, the robot readied itself to unleash its most devastating attack: divine punishment. Several robots like it began to emerge in the lunar atmosphere, their swords piercing through the very fabric of the planet. Massive waves of electrical energy surged from the moon, crackling with raw power. Yet none of this could deter the protagonist, who understood that the human spirit had been relentlessly pursuing strength. After all, size and numbers alone did not equate to true power. This realization struck terror into the ancient entity. With just a snap of his fingers, the protagonist obliterated the robots, reducing them to mere dust. Massive earthquakes rippled across the lunar surface, the aftermath of this monumental battle already reaching Earth. Confronted with the looming threat, the presidents knew they had to act quickly to evacuate the citizens from the city. At last, the protagonist reached the core of the enemy. With a decisive strike, he landed an unguarded blow to its face, sending the creature plummeting toward Earth. It crashed into the ocean, creating a splash that shimmered like shattered glass. Meanwhile, the protagonist chose to descend onto the continent. With determination, he began to tear apart the land beneath him. In the face of such overwhelming power, there seemed to be little that could stand in his way. Within the city, the presidents were already focused on the urgent task of complete evacuation. Citizens frantically searched for shelter, their panic palpable. Amidst the chaos, a woman with striking blue hair noticed a crack in the ground that continued to widen. Uncertain of its implications, she felt a chill run down her spine. Meanwhile, the protagonist relentlessly tore the continent apart with his bare hands, and soon, the overwhelming terror consumed all of humanity. Once again, a cataclysm of planetary proportions was unfolding. Sensors indicated that the earthquake had already registered a staggering 20 points on the measurement scale. With the ease of tearing a sheet of paper, the protagonist had split the continent in two. Now, in the heart of the city, a massive rift cleaved it into two distinct halves. Completely overwhelmed by the imminent danger, the blue-haired woman plummeted into the abyss, its depths shrouded in darkness. Just as she was about to disappear into the void, a brave extra intervened, catching her just in time. It seemed unimaginable that anyone could achieve such a daring rescue. "Hold on tight," he urged, gripping her firmly as they both teetered on the edge of the unknown. She couldn't shake her worry about the turmoil unfolding in the city. Meanwhile, the consciousness of the ancient human fought desperately to regain its strength. His body was being mercilessly battered by the protagonist, and his hair had grown long and wild. With a final, powerful blow, he was sent hurtling toward a distant mountain. Barely clinging to consciousness, he attempted to heal his wounds. Turning to the head of the department, he asked, "Do you now comprehend the true magnitude of this destructive power?" But he couldn't hear the response. His attention was consumed by the sight of a colossal tsunami approaching. The protagonist now sported hair as long as Goku's older brother. It was difficult to fathom what kind of being he had truly become. Meanwhile, Violet, having been free from her restraints for some time, observed the unfolding battle. The Blood Queen had never witnessed this form before, and questioned whether this was truly the zombie she once knew. This was precisely what the ancient human had witnessed, the true form of the zombie that had laid waste to everything. Aware that his opponent was now at full power, he charged forward. Yet the protagonist remained utterly still, not even twitching a muscle. Blackie, observing his boss, began to question whether he had lost control. He knew he had to act swiftly, otherwise that human was about to lose his life. The ancient consciousness summoned all its power to bring the battle to an end, offering an apology for what it was about to inflict on the department head's body. Despite the chilling aura surrounding him, the protagonist's expression remained inscrutable. With a mere flick of his hand, he unleashed a force powerful enough to shatter the ancient armor. Then, as he clenched his fist, the intensity of his attack surged even further. To the hologram man's astonishment, his body was grotesquely contorted as he was hurled toward Earth with catastrophic force. His armor, once formidable, had been completely obliterated. Even in its most powerful state, it had failed to contain the relentless zombie. Yet, against all odds, the department head still clung to life. As they gazed upon him, the presidents felt a wave of sorrow wash over them, realizing that hope for his survival was slipping away. Blackie understood that they couldn't be held accountable for the death of the human leader. The protagonist shared this awareness, which is why he snapped his fingers. Instantly, the wound on the department head's chest began to heal. With the injury mended, the only remaining issue was his perilous descent from an almost stratospheric height. The protagonist focused intently on regeneration. Gradually, the void began to fill once more, leaving the presidents in stunned silence. Even the Blood Queen couldn't help but be impressed by this display of power. Violet, too, was taken aback, her expression reflecting the oddity of the moment. Meanwhile, the department head regained consciousness, miraculously returning to life. As he turned his head, he realized who had brought him back. The protagonist remained resolute, doing everything in his power to complete the regeneration. At last, the head of the department grasped the gravity of the situation. He realized why the ancient civilization had been so intent on erasing him from existence. Their feelings toward that zombie were rooted in genuine fear. With this revelation, the protagonist concluded his role in the battle. There was nothing more to be done, and the presidents watched as the events reached an unusual conclusion. Violet emerged from the ocean, a striking figure transformed, her mask still in place. The zombie, having reverted to his base form, approached her with curiosity, eager to know if she had adapted to wielding the power of the bloodline. She let out a deep sigh, attributing everything to him. Their homes had been utterly erased from existence. If he had the power to end it all with a single strike, he should have done so from the very beginning. But the zombie had hesitated, not wanting to instill fear. Ironically, it was the vampires who ended up terrified. Meanwhile, the Blood Queen did her utmost to conceal herself. That event triggered a dramatic shift in the southern continent, moving it a staggering 130 kilometers and forever altering the planet's climate. It also carved out the deepest trench known to man. Fortunately, the city had been evacuated in time, resulting in almost no casualties. In an unexpected twist, the zombies were assigned the task of rebuilding the ravaged cities. Meanwhile, the head of the department continued his administrative duties, now fully aware of why the ancient civilization sought to eradicate the zombies in the first place. It was up to him to decide how to proceed. After witnessing such immense power, the chief inspector arrived in his office at his request, where he was instructed to procure high-quality eggs for an important visit that was bound to stir the city. Meanwhile, in a neighboring city, the Blood Tribe was busy establishing a new settlement. One of the tribe members impatiently urged a sluggish zombie worker to pick up the pace. His friend was curious about where he had acquired the money to hire those workers, but he remained tight-lipped. Despite being adversaries, the loan shark agreed to lend them the funds. This unusual cooperation stemmed from the king's decree forbidding them from fighting, a move intended to curb future bank robberies. Thus, he offered a loan laden with exorbitant interest rates. It was clear that the nickname Loan Shark was well-deserved in this tale. As their conversation continued, the young man inquired about the queen's whereabouts. She had been consumed by desolation ever since the recent events unfolded. Never had she imagined that her enemy possessed such overwhelming strength. In their previous encounters, he had only revealed a fraction of his true power. Now, after witnessing the extent of his abilities, she realized that she could never hope to match him. The city lay in a serene yet eerie stillness, its ruins whispering tales of an ancient civilization. Amidst the debris, treasure hunters scoured the remnants for valuable artifacts. Among them were the mad scientists, who appeared to have stumbled upon something significant. Before them lay a small, charred body, a grim testament to their discovery. Professor Jamie studied it intently, his eyes gleaming with determination. He knew he wouldn't abandon his ambitions as long as there was even a flicker of life left within that tiny form. The alarm clock blared in the protagonist's room, pulling him from the depths of slumber. With a contented sigh, he reached out to silence it, but the warmth of his bed held him captive. His name was Zombie, a fitting moniker for someone who felt so disconnected from life. As he shuffled toward the refrigerator, a nagging thought crossed his mind. He had no idea how old he was or what his human life had been like.